Chapter 1180. Once all of this was done, Wang Chong turned his head and narrowed his eyes at the two men on the walls of Khorasan. Abu Muslim, Ziyad, I've already given you a chance. Since you're not willing to surrender, I'll fulfill your wish. You will live and die with this city. After saying this, Wang Chong closed his eyes and became motionless. The army of 200,000 behind him also remained motionless, as if they were statues. But the more this was the case, the more uneasy the two men on the walls became. No one knew what Wang Chong was up to. Ziyad, confirm it again. We can't let what happened in Samarkand happen again. Put the city gates under martial law. If you see any Sassanid approaching, kill them all. In addition, has the news reached Baghdad? When will our reinforcements arrive? Abu Muslim turned to Ziyad and said, Khorasan was the last gate of Arabia in the east. Once Khorasan was lost, the Arab capital of Baghdad would be threatened. The two were only 2,000 some kilometers apart, and it would take only a few days to reach the city. In the history of the Arabian Empire's constant expansion and conquest, this was the first time it had been forced to such a close distance. This was the reason why Abu Muslim had chosen to remain in Khorasan instead of fleeing west. I've already confirmed that all the gates are heavily guarded, so there won't be any problems. The news has also been sent to Baghdad, but the nobles in the capital are in disarray. In addition, in the previous battle, the soldiers of Cairo, Qutayba, and our own soldiers have all been mobilized from the eastern half of the empire. We have no soldiers to use at the moment. Although there are other governors and soldiers, they won't be able to get here in a short time. The soldiers closest to us will need more than half a month to get here. And they don't have many soldiers. Even if they get here, they won't be a match for them, Ziyad sincerely said. As he spoke, his gaze swept over the 200,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty, Khorasan, and various other factions. Every time he looked at them, Ziyad would be stunned. At the start of the war between the Arabs and the Tang dynasty, they had only had 110,000 soldiers. But now, not only had their numbers not decreased, they had increased, reaching an astonishing number of nearly 200,000. Furthermore, the strength of this army was extraordinary. They stood in formation outside the city, surging with killing intent. The rebels and remnants of the dynasty that Abu Muslim and Tang Walin had been unable to find were now borrowing the power of the Tang dynasty to emerge like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. This was something that Abu Muslim and Ziyad had never imagined. Abu Muslim's heart sank at Ziyad's words. At this moment he could only rely on himself. The only reassuring thing was that as long as nothing happened to the city gate, he still had time to wait for other reinforcements to arrive. Something's wrong. As he stared at the army outside the city, Abu Muslim's eyes suddenly widened as a thought flashed through his mind. Something strange. There must be something else that we haven't noticed. Ziyad, take some people and investigate again. If you find any Khorasani spies, kill them all. Abu Muslim was currently on high alert, and he would rather kill the wrong person than let them go. Khorasan was far too important. If it fell, even if he managed to survive, he would be no different from dying. But my lord, if the Tang people want to occupy Khorasan, they can only break through the walls. The gates are under our control, so how could they get in? Moreover, we've recruited 30,000 soldiers. Even if the Khorasani have spies in the city, they won't be able to shake us. Could they just drop from the sky? Ziyad couldn't help but say, drop from the sky. Abu Muslim's eyes widened at Ziyad's words. He seemed to have grasped onto something, but he couldn't immediately sort it out. For a moment time seemed to stop. As Abu Muslim was thinking, a massive boom came from the southeast of Khorasan. At that moment countless soldiers began to roar and roar. Bang! Abu Muslim's eyes lit up, and then his eyes lit up. Bang! 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 Buzz! Abu Muslim's body shuddered at the sounds of battle, and he felt like he had been struck by lightning. He finally knew what was wrong. Wang Chong and his people might not be able to drop from the sky like birds, but they could break out of the ground. The Tang people might not be familiar with this place, and could not dig out such a massive tunnel in such a short amount of time, but the Sassanid people might not be able to do so. Most importantly, This place used to be the royal capital of the Sassanid dynasty. Damn it! At this moment, Abu Muslim's face twisted into a nasty grimace. He knew that he had still underestimated Wang Chong. But before Abu Muslim could react, a heaven-shaking roar came from outside the city. The 200,000 soldiers who had been motionless this entire time suddenly charged out, their cries shaking the heavens. Just as the two of them watched, a huge metal machine was suddenly pushed forward from behind. Fire! Amidst the army, Su Hanshan waved his arm, and the sharp metal anchors that Zhang Shouji had hurriedly manufactured flew out of long metal tubes and toward the top of the city walls. Ding ding ding! In the blink of an eye, these sharp anchors, dragging long ropes behind them, were firmly planted on the walls of the city. Flying cannon shackles. These were weapons that Zhang Shouji had ordered his craftsmen to produce on his journey west. Although he had been pressed for time, as a master of construction, Zhang Shouji had managed to produce quite a few flying cannon shackles in a short time. These weapons were simple in structure, and only required great flexibility and firepower. To Zhang Shouji, who had thoroughly studied the secrets of ballisty, this was no problem at all. After removing the unnecessary complexity and leaving only the necessary parts, the flying cannon shackles had been completed. Go! Everyone prepare to climb the walls. Following the order, countless soldiers immediately climbed up the city wall along the ropes like monkeys. Everyone attacked the walls. Clang! With a heaven-shaking sword cry, Bahram pulled out his Wutz steel sword and pointed it at the heavens. The 8,000 Samasweran cataphracts had been secretly sent into Khorasan through the tunnels that the Sassanid dynasty had established. This was how the Khorasani royal family and the Aswaran cataphracts had managed to escape from the Arabs, vanishing without a trace. And now, they had become an important tool for the Khorasani to counterattack the Arabs. Khail, hurry and stop them. Cut the anchors and the ropes. We can't let them climb up. On the walls, the Arabs were in a panic, all of them beginning to hack at the flying cannon shackles. Hurry! Abu Muslim roared in fury at this sight. Boom! With a thought, a pitch-black energy exploded out of his body. Clang clang clang. Tinsome sharp flying cannons were pulverized by Abu Muslim's shockwaves. Ha ha ha, Abu Muslim. There's no need to waste your energy. You've already lost this battle. At this moment, Wang Chong heartily laughed, and then he stomped down, his stellar energy exploding. With a dragon roar, he transformed into a massive golden dragon that coiled around the walls of Khorasan and began to rapidly ascend. Leaping dragon art. Even now, when Wang Chong used the same technique at different levels of cultivation, the difference in power was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. The walls of Khorasan soared into the clouds, making it impossible to fly up. But the leaping dragon art that Wang Chong used was completely different. Bang! Just when the first leaping dragon art was about to be unleashed, Wang Chong stomped his right foot on the back of his left foot. There was a clattering of metal, and a visible ripple of air erupted from beneath Wang Chong's foot. Meanwhile, Wang Chong borrowed this repulsive force to once more coiled around the walls of Khorasan. Once, twice, thrice. In just a few seconds, before anyone could react, Wang Chong was already on the edge of the walls of Khorasan. Great Inyang Heaven Creation Art. Wang Chong's expression was cold and aloof, as his voice resounded through the heavens. At the same time, a light even more dazzling than the sun erupted from his body. In the blink of an eye, Wang Chong had transformed into a blazing red sun in the sky above Khorasan. As soon as this dazzling red sun appeared, a series of blood-curdling screams rang out. The Arab soldiers on the walls had no time to react before their bodies began to seethe with blood, seeping through their pores and surging toward Wang Chong. 20 to 30 Arab soldiers furiously hacking at the flying cannons were instantly sucked dry of their blood, their flesh withered, and they dropped to the ground. And the effects of Wang Chong's great Inyang Heaven Creation Art were not limited to just this. My lord, watch out! At the same time, Ziad cried out in alarm. Even though Ziad was doing his utmost to resist, the blood energy in his body was still being forced out of his body by Wang Chong's great Inyang Heaven Creation Art. Abu Muslim was in a similar situation. When Wang Chong broke into the Imperial Great General level, he had advanced by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of the Imperial General level. His strength had reached an unbelievable level, and he was also extremely familiar with the various martial arts. His grasp and understanding of the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art was enough to make all experts tremble in fear. Abu Muslim and Ziyad had already recovered the majority of their strength, but they were still no match for Wang Chong. Damn it! Abu Muslim's eyes widened. Wang Chong had appeared far too quickly, appearing on the walls in just a few seconds. Get out of my way! Black energy gathered around Abu Muslim's body, and like steel, he slammed it at Wang Chong. As he attacked, he rapidly retreated. Chapter 1181. Haha, Abu Muslim, it's useless. Even Qutayba has died in battle. Do you think that you can still fight me as an equal? With a thought from Wang Chong, the air in a radius of several dozen feet began to shudder, all the air under Wang Chong's control fiercely surging and churning. An enormous attractive force emerged from Wang Chong's body, pulling on the thick walls of Khorasan and pulling him toward the top of the walls. Great destruction art. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong immediately used the strongest technique of the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art. The entire world became deathly still, all light distorting. From a distance, it seemed like the walls of Khorasan had been plunged into darkness, and in the depths of this darkness was the most terrifying energy of destruction. Not good. With this shout, Abu Muslim and Ziyad began to tremble, expressions of extreme shock on their faces. Ocean Ring. Asmodee's fury. In the blink of an eye, the two of them were both shocked and enraged, and they both unleashed their most powerful techniques. Rumble. 3 enormous floods of energy collided in the air, resulting in a heaven-shaking boom. 2 screams rang out as Abu Muslim and Ziyad were sent flying like ragdolls. At the same time, with a thought, Wang Chong leaped over the wall like a hawk. His body twisted in midair and steadily landed on the wall. Thump thump thump. A series of footsteps resounded in Wang Chong's ears, and Abu Muslim was forced back 6 or 7 steps before he was able to stabilize himself. Not far from him, Plush. Ziyad's chest trembled and he vomited blood, his face pale. He raised his head to look at Wang Chong, who had descended like a demon god, and a hint of despair appeared in his eyes. He knew that Wang Chong was strong, but he never imagined that Wang Chong was strong to such an extent that they were no match for him even after joining forces. How is this possible? How could a person advance by leaps and bounds in such a short period of time? No one can be like this Tang people and possess such terrifying strength. Ziyad sensed the waves of pain in his body, his eyes ashen. From breaking into the great general realm to reaching the peak, everyone had spent many years and months, but Wang Chong had used only a few days to accomplish this astonishing transformation. Even thinking about it now, Ziyad still felt incredibly shocked. All of this caused one to feel a deep sense of despair. Abu Muslim, Ziyad, it's all over. This is your final destination. Give me your life. Wang Chong's eyes were sharp as his resounding voice resounded through the heavens. This war had begun because of Abu Muslim, because of Arabia's greed for the Tang dynasty, and in the end, it would end with the two of them. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, an enormous wave of psychic energy surged through the air, splitting into 2 and stabbing into the minds of Abu Muslim and Ziyad like the sharpest of spears. As their minds were shaken by Wang Chong's interference, the air rumbled and the halo under Wang Chong's feet shuddered. Golden stellar energy surged out of his body, filling the heavens with a momentum that could topple mountains and topple seas, as it rumbled toward Abu Muslim and Ziyad. Before Wang Chong's attack could even land, the sturdy walls beneath their feet began to crumble and cave in, a spiderweb of cracks appearing. The entire city of Khorasan began to hum and tremble, completely unable to endure this dreadful attack. Run! Even Abu Muslim and Ziyad grimaced at this sight. The strength Wang Chong had displayed had completely surpassed theirs, a strength that could make one despair. Bang! A hint of determination flashed through Abu Muslim's eyes, and with a thought, he stomped down on the ground and charged at Wang Chong, his energy surging. But Abu Muslim had only just begun to attack when a burst of energy collided with him from behind and sent him flying. "Milord, run! I'll stop him!" Before Abu Muslim could react, Ziad was already charging at Wang Chong, his eyes bloodshot, and a look of resolve on his face. He could not escape. After this continuous battle, his injuries were far more severe than Abu Muslim's. Moreover, Ziad knew that Wang Chong would never allow him to escape. In his current condition, his chances of escaping alive were minuscule. Moreover, Qutayba was dead, Ibak was dead, Osman was dead, and in the end, if even his commanding officer Abu Muslim was killed in battle, the caliph would have no choice but to kill him and bury him with the rest of the governors. "Milord, we fought side by side for 10 some years, and you've always taken care of me. This time, let me take care of Milord. At the very least, if Milord survives, you will have a chance to avenge me and Lord Qutayba." Ziad's hair danced in the howling winds as he stared at Wang Chong, his fists clenched tightly. "Tang people, come. I'll fight you to the death," Ziad roared, and without the slightest hesitation he flicked his wrist. The ocean ring immediately began to churn up thousands of black torrents that surged toward Wang Chong from all sides. "You overestimate yourself," Wang Chong coldly snorted. His body vibrated with golden light and boomed like a tide, shattering Ziad's attack with a single blow. Crack! Before anyone else could react, Wang Chong had already closed in, his 5 fingers gripping Ziad's neck like a pair of iron pincers, sealing off all his stellar energy and slowly lifting him off the ground. With the ocean ring and the power of his ritual tool, Ziad was on par with Chung Qianli in his supreme desolation god form. 7 or 8 days ago, when Wang Chong had yet to become a great general, Ziad might have been able to put up a fight against him. But now Ziad was simply too naive to think that he could contend against him. But surprisingly, Ziad, with his vitals under Wang Chong's control, and his life in Wang Chong's hands, didn't seem to care at all. He used all his strength to let out a heart-rending roar. "Milord, run! Run!" This roar was like a clap of thunder, shaking the souls of many people. Even Wang Chong was taken aback. He had never imagined that the Arabs, famed for their savagery and cruelty, would have someone like Ziad. At the last moment, Abu Muslim was not thinking of himself, but of Ziad, completely disregarding his own death. Fwoosh! 10 some zhang away, Abu Muslim had been about to charge at Wang Chong. But when he heard this roar, his body trembled and his mind began to churn in great waves. "Ziad!" Abu Muslim's teeth were clenched so tightly that they were about to shatter. "Run!" Ziad harshly said. "Kill!" At this moment, not far from Abu Muslim, a Tang dynasty warrior used the flying chains to scale the walls, and behind him, more and more people began to climb the walls. "Charge with me! Open the gates!" Meanwhile, Khorasan was in turmoil, the clashing of swords and sabers as more and more Khorasani entered the city through the tunnels. The 8,000 some Aswaran cataphracts that the Arabs had been searching for this entire time had appeared in front of Abu Muslim in a way that no one could have imagined, and they were rapidly charging toward the city gates. Abu Muslim could see that Gao Xianji, Chung Qianli, and the evil emperor were also making their way over. The situation was hopeless. At this moment, Abu Muslim understood that whether he was willing or not, whether he stayed or not, Khorasan was fated to fall. Even someone as iron-blooded as Abu Muslim couldn't help but let out a tragic roar. "Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, the grudge between us will not end here. There will come a day when my soldiers will reach the walls and truly set foot on the lands of the Central Plains." With these words, Abu Muslim leaped off the wall and flew off like a bolt of lightning. An Aswaran cataphract saw Abu Muslim and charged forward, but he was sent flying 50 to 60 zhang by Abu Muslim's palm. Before his body could even hit the ground, his famed Aswaran cataphract had been shattered into countless pieces. Abu Muslim, you won't get the chance," Wang Chong sneered, activating the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art as he snapped Ziad's neck. Wang Chong had no pity for these enemies of the Tang dynasty. As invaders, they had to be prepared to pay a price if their invasion failed. Abu Muslim's group had only been forced into desperate straits. If these two had won, they would have had a completely different and savage appearance, and what awaited the Tang dynasty would have been nothing more than a tragic loss of territory. Sympathizing with the enemy is being cruel to yourself. Ziad, go in peace. Abu Muslim will soon join you. Wang Chong glanced at Ziad's corpse and coldly said. Wang Chong made a gesture, and a group of Tang dynasty soldiers quickly slid down the walls and began to head toward the eastern gate of Khorasan. In the distance, 10 Samasweran cataphracts urged their horses forward and began to ride toward the gate. Rumble. A few moments later, there was a heaven-shaking boom as the sturdy gate of Khorasan slowly opened. Khorasan had been formally breached. How about it? Do you want to give chase? Chapter 1182. There's no need. Wang Chong and Gao Xianji stood side by side, gazing at the thick plumes of smoke rising from the walls of Khorasan. If someone like Abu Muslim wants to escape, it will be very difficult for us to find him in such a large city. Moreover, our next step is not to fight or kill a single person, but to consider the overall situation. General Chung, have you prepared the letter I told you about? It was prepared a long time ago. With Shi holding the brush, it can be sent to Baghdad by the Arabian hunting falcons at any time. A voice came from behind. Cheng Qianli tapped lightly on the top of the city wall and quickly caught up. A top-class great general would always consider the outcome of a battle. But Wang Chong did not just consider the situation on the battlefield, but also the overall situation outside the battlefield. His vision and plans were enough to make the other great generals of the continent pale in comparison. This was also why Cheng Qianli admired him. The army quickly surged in. Without Abu Muslim and Ziad to guard the city, the tens of thousands of soldiers collapsed and were wiped out faster than ever before. Only 4 hours had passed from the opening of the gate to the entrance of the army. Wang Chong and his army had completely taken over the strategic city at the western end of the Silk Road. This is the Tigris River? On the western side of Khorasan, on the high walls, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli Li Sai, Wen Shuyang, and Bahram all ascended to the top of the walls. Standing on the eastern wall of Khorasan, Wang Chong could see at a glance that a vast river was surging through the city. This river was 50 to 60 zhang wide and extremely deep. Although the water flowed rapidly, it was not as turbid as imagined. For the first time in Wang Chong's life, he saw one of the two most famous rivers of the Sassanid dynasty west of the Tsong Mountains, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This was the source of the Sassanid dynasty's civilization, and also the most important river of the Arabian Empire. This is only a tributary of the Tigris River. The main branch of this river is even wider and grander than what you see. Our Sassanid people were able to nurture several thousand years of history and become the strongest country on the coast precisely because of these two rivers. But now, they have both fallen into the hands of the Arabian Empire. They have even imposed heavy taxes on anyone who crosses these two rivers. Our Sassanids cannot travel east or west without these two rivers. Every year, they take an incalculable amount of wealth and send it to the Arab treasury. Bahram sighed. Wang Chong silently listened, a few thoughts flitting through his mind, but he quickly calmed down. History had changed significantly from what Wang Chong remembered. At the very least, in Wang Chong's memories, there were no tributaries of the Tigris River outside Khorasan. Wang Chong's gaze paused on this famed river of the West and Arabia for a few moments, and then he slowly raised his head and gazed into the distance. Wang Chong could faintly see an enormous capital. This was the center of the Western continent's politics, power, culture, and military. Baghdad. This thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind. Abu Muslim had wanted to break through Talas and occupy the western regions. Ironically, in the end, Abu Muslim had not been able to threaten Chang'an. Instead, Wang Chong had marched westward, penetrating deep into Arabia, and following the Silk Road to reach Khorasan, the city at the end of the Silk Road. General Cheng, begin. Wang Chong continued to look forward, not even turning his head. Yes. A few moments after Cheng Qianli spoke, an Arabian hunting falcon soared into the sky, flying toward the capital of the Arabian Empire, Baghdad. More than 2,200 kilometers. This was already a very close distance. Starting from Khorasan, crossing the Tigris River and Euphrates River, and traveling west for another 1,300 kilometers, one would reach the core of the Arabian Empire. This was a majestic city, its towers and domed palaces so densely packed together that they reached into the heavens. This small place was home to many soldiers, millions of civilians, and countless merchants. The economy, culture, and politics were all extremely developed. This was Baghdad, the largest center of the Arabian Empire. On the western border, it had another resounding name: Sleepless City. Everyone in this city celebrated day and night, and it was called the Sleepless City. Cree. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the sky. An enormous Arabian hunting falcon spread its wings, its feathers trembling as it descended from the sky like an arrow. Wrapped in a gust of wind, it flew into the imperial palace at the highest point of Baghdad. Rumble! But unbeknownst to anyone, this Arabian hunting falcon's descent into the imperial palace was like a boulder crashing into the ground, sending massive waves through the empire. Bastard! A thunderous roar resounded through the imperial palace at the highest point of Baghdad, causing countless governors, generals, and nobles to kneel on the ground, their bodies trembling in fear. At the highest point of the palace, seated on a golden throne, the Caliph of the Arabian Empire, Mu'tasim III, dressed in a white robe of silver silk and wearing a golden crown, his eyes spitting out thunderous flames. As the sovereign of the Abbasid Caliphate, Mu'tasim III was hailed as the greatest sovereign in the history of the Abbasid Caliphate. Under his rule, the Abbasid Caliphate had destroyed countless factions, and the empire's territory had been expanded to an unprecedented level of prosperity. Countless famous ministers, generals, and ministers, millions of elite cavalry and powerful armies were all waiting for him, ready to conquer the world for him at any time. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was one of the most powerful rulers in the world. But at this moment, all this glory had vanished into thin air. The behemoth army had been destroyed, the skyquaking army had been dealt a heavy blow, Qutayba had been killed in battle, Ibak had been killed, Osman had been killed, the Mamelukes had been destroyed. He had heard far too much grievous news in this period. Mu'tasim III had originally held great expectations for this eastern campaign, hoping to use his enormous army to conquer the East and unify the continent, accomplishing an unprecedented feat. But now, all his hopes had been shattered. Not only that, a great general of the Eastern infidel had arrived at his gates and threatened his Baghdad. Moreover, this enemy had put forth an extremely excessive demand. This was a terrible humiliation that Mu'tasim III could not endure. Your Majesty, these Tang people have only given us 3 days to reply, but carrier pigeons require 2 days. If we do not receive a reply or refuse their demands, they will immediately take action. They will cross the Tigris River and head west to capture even more cities. This will cause the entire empire to panic, which will be extremely detrimental to the empire. An Arab minister dressed in jewels kneeled on the ground and fearfully spoke. Useless thing! We have so many soldiers, so many governors and generals. Would we be threatened by a single infidel? Pass on our decree. Exterminate these Tang people and the remnants of the dynasty. Mu'tasim III was like an enraged lion, his voice ringing with fury. Bzzz. The hall was deathly still. Everyone kneeling on the ground, their heads bowed to the ground. Why aren't you speaking? Speak. We have so many soldiers and generals. Are we incapable of exterminating a trifling army of 200,000? Mu'tasim III angrily rebuked. Your Majesty, in the previous battles we sent all our soldiers to Talas and Cairo, the north and the east, totaling nearly 500,000 soldiers. After the defeat at Talas, we were almost completely wiped out. Right now, our entire eastern region has no soldiers to use. An Arab general stammered. Not only that, Qutayba and Abu Muslim have always been the strongest governors of the empire. The number of people in the empire that can compare to them can be counted on one's fingers. Even if we send soldiers now, we will find it very difficult to defeat them. Moreover, gathering soldiers is not something that can be done in 3 to 5 days. But if we do not immediately agree to the demands of those infidels, they will immediately cross the Tigris River and attack all the other cities, perhaps even Baghdad. Another general mustered up his courage and said, "Crack." Just as the two of them finished speaking, a crisp sound suddenly rang out in the hall. Mutisim III's 5 fingers tightened, and the armrest of the throne in his right hand was instantly crushed to pieces. His originally fair face became extremely red. As the strongest monarch in the history of the Arabian Empire, this was the first time he had been forced into a situation where he had no soldiers to use. 1 billion taels of gold, 1 billion taels. Do all of you mean that we should agree to that madman of the East, accept his extortion, and give them so much wealth? Mutisim III's expression was furious, his eyes gloomy. 1 billion taels of gold. Even though Arabia was as wealthy as a country, having plundered the treasures of countless kingdoms and factions over the past several hundred years, accumulating an enormous amount of wealth, this was still an enormous sum to the Arabs. But your majesty, if we do not agree, we will lose far more than 1 billion taels of gold. They can advance east from Khorasan and conquer many territories. With 200,000 soldiers and those skilled Eastern great generals, we won't be able to resist them in a short time. In the end, even if we drive them out of the empire, we will still suffer grievous losses. Your Highness, an Arab noble said in a trembling voice, the cities of the east were in peril, but the 200,000 soldiers had remained in Khorasan, waiting to move out. This was even more shocking than a true attack. Using several dozen cities of the Arabian Empire as a threat, and using the name of war reparations to demand a price of 1 billion taels of gold, was simply unprecedented. Not even in the Arabian Empire's endless conquests had such a thing been heard of. Chapter 1183. Boom! The Arab noble had barely finished speaking when a golden war boot emerged from the throne. As everyone looked on in awe, Mutisim III suddenly stood up from his throne. At that moment, the world swayed, and the vast city of Baghdad seemed unable to endure this power and fiercely shuddered. We will not submit to anyone's threats. Even if all the cities of the East are destroyed and all the people slaughtered, we will not submit to the extortion of an Eastern madman. Let him take the 1 billion taels himself. Even if we have to pay half the city, we will personally tear him to pieces. Mutisim III's rage was unquenchable, and his eyes were like bolts of lightning, exuding intimidating light. In the face of the furious caliph, everyone kept quiet out of fear, no one daring to say a word. In the Arabian Empire, the caliph's word was law. Once he made a decision, no one could stop him, much less defy him. If I were His Majesty, I would give away the 1 billion taels of gold right now. Just as the atmosphere reached a freezing point, a hoarse and mysterious voice suddenly rang out from outside the hall. Hearing this voice, everyone's body shook violently. The caliph's word was law. No one had expected that someone would anger His Majesty at a time like this. But a moment later, just when everyone was stunned by this person's boldness, there was a flash of light as a slanted figure shot into the hall. At some point, a tall figure shrouded in a black robe had appeared at the entrance to the hall. His pitch-black robe was embroidered with mysterious runes using golden threads. High Priest. A noble of the Arabian Empire trembled at the sight of this figure, his eyes going wide. No one had expected that this mysterious person, who dared to contradict the caliph, would be the most enigmatic person in the empire. The high priest who wielded the divine authority. This was definitely the most unexpected guest of the imperial palace. As a legendary existence that had existed for centuries in the empire, although almost no one had ever seen the high priest before, they all recognized the unique sun god robe and the black temple scepter in his hand. One of the high priest's skinny hands reached out from his sleeves like a bird's claw and grabbed the black scepter's power. Rolling black mist kept coming out from his sleeves. His hat was lowered, completely concealing his face. He only stood there motionless, but not a single one of the governors, generals, and nobles in the hall could sense the depth of his cultivation. Although he had truly appeared in front of everyone, they could not sense anything other than the black scepter. It was as if there was nothing there. Buzz! In the blink of an eye, the high priestess's long robe fluttered as she stepped over the threshold and entered. High priest, why have you come? To Mutisim III's surprise, The enraged Arab Caliph Mu'tasim III was like a punctured balloon, all his anger vanishing. Not only was he not enraged, he was even pleasantly surprised. Bum bum bum, he excitedly descended from the hall and personally went to welcome Wang Chong. Everyone in Arabia knew of the caliph's attitude toward the high priest. But only at this moment did they realize just how much importance His Majesty placed on him. The defeat at Talas, the death of Qutayba, and the arrival of the Tang people at Khorasan to intimidate Baghdad. How could I not come for such a major event? The high priest said faintly as he walked forward slowly. As he walked, the air seemed to turn into waves. Translucent ripples that were visible to the naked eye spread out from his feet. It was as if he was walking on water. Not only that, when the high priest walked forward, even his figure became faint, like a transparent ripple of water. It was as if the person passing by them was not a real person, but a faint ripple of water. Swoosh! In a flash, everyone retreated to the sides, and even the governors had to lower their heads to make way. The governors' cultivation bases were also different. With their abilities, they couldn't even sense the breath of the high priestess. They could only feel a thick darkness that seemed to be devouring everything, causing them to feel fear and awe. A few moments later, the high priest stopped in front of the caliph. He did not bow, nor did he show the respect a subject should have. He exuded an aura that transcended the authority of the empire. From a certain perspective, this was an offense against the caliph. But the caliph seemed to not care at all. Not only that, the caliph seemed to be even more respectful toward the high priest. High priest, you've come at just the right time. We have so many soldiers and so many generals. Do you think that we will be threatened by a teenager from the east? Arabia lives on war, and no soldier has ever surrendered. We still have half of the country and 1 million elites. Do we have to submit to the Tang people of the east? The caliph strode up to the high priest. It's just 1 billion taels of gold. Does your majesty lack money? The high priest did not answer. Instead, he asked about something else. Although 1 billion taels is an extremely large sum, the empire has saved up for centuries. It is still possible to produce such a sum. The caliph slightly raised his head, his eyes disdainful and his face brimming with pride. 1 billion taels of gold was an astronomical sum to many dynasties, countries, and even large empires. When Wang Chong requested the imperial court to send reinforcements for the Battle of Talas, the Bureau of Personnel had only given him 20 million taels of gold. At the time, the imperial court had already felt that it was a lot. And 1 billion taels of gold was 50 times the amount that Wang Chong had used to launch the Battle of Talas, enough to buy several cities. But to the Arabian Empire, this was not an unbearable sum. This was the advantage of being a marauder. Every time he won a country, he would plunder everything from it. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty, which was bound by etiquette and righteousness, could not compare. But to rely on the strength of a single country to create wealth comparable to that of Arabia was something that only the Central Plains could do. I can produce 1 billion taels of gold, but I cannot accept the conditions of these Easterners and submit to them. The caliph's eyes were sharp as he firmly declared. This was no longer a matter of money. To accept the Tang people's conditions was to submit, to be humiliated. As the highest commander of the empire, the caliph could not tolerate such a thing. It's just 1 billion taels of gold. How can this be considered submission? Does your majesty intend to surrender without a fight? The high priest indifferently said, his expression unruffled. Only the high priest could dare to speak to the supreme caliph in such a manner, as if he was above imperial authority, and yet the caliph did not rebuke him. How could this be? The caliph was stunned at first, but then he immediately rejected the idea. We still have many soldiers in the southern war zone, the western war zone, and the other war zones. These soldiers can all be mobilized. It's just a trifling army of 200,000. Once we mobilize the army, all that awaits them will be death. The caliph clenched his fists, his voice seething with killing intent. Arabia was a country of war, and he was also the sovereign of war. This was the reason for his rage. That Eastern Tang dynasty commander called Wang Chong had actually sent a letter to threaten them. If they did not reply within 3 days, He would pay 1 billion taels of gold as compensation, and they would immediately continue eastward and occupy more cities. To Mutism III, who had always been known for his unyielding character and had a deep influence on his governors and generals, this was a public provocation and humiliation. This was also the reason for the caliph's rage. Moreover, even though Qutayba and Ibak had died in battle, they had only lost 2 of their best soldiers. Arabia still had many of its best fighters. Isn't that so? Since His Majesty still has many soldiers and is preparing for an even larger war, how can this be considered a surrender? With His Majesty's abilities, gold and silver are nothing in his eyes. 1 billion taels of gold is only used to appease the Tang people. It's said that the Tang dynasty is famed for its benevolence and righteousness. Once they receive the money, they will keep their promises. His Majesty only needs to temporarily appease them. Once the army arrives, he will be able to protect the cities west of the Tigris River from their attacks. And he will also be able to break into Khorasan and wipe out the Tang people and the rebel army in one fell swoop. And he will also be able to retrieve the gold. The high priest's raspy and deep voice resounded in everyone's ears. 1 billion taels of gold is no small sum. Even if they spur their horses at full speed, they won't be able to get very far. Once we break into Khorasan, His Majesty can dispatch cavalry to pursue and retrieve the gold. Moreover, hasn't His Majesty been searching for the remnants of the conquered countries and the rebel army in the last few years without any results? We can use these Tang people to draw out the entire rebel army. Won't that be killing 2 birds with 1 stone and capturing them all in one fell swoop? Buzz! Hearing this, the Khalifa's expression shook, and he suddenly raised his head. He had been driven mad by the compensation of 1 billion taels of gold. And in his desperation, he had never thought of anything else. It was true that the remnants of the dynasties and the rebel army had always been a sore point for Arabia. In the last 10-some years, the empire had expended a great deal of effort in searching for the traces of these rebels. The behemoth army, the Mamelukes, the skyquaking army, and even an Arab war god like Qutayba had been dispatched by Mutism III to suppress the rebels. But the rebel army and the remnants of the dynasties had always been like rats. When the army arrived, they would hide like turtles. The moment the army left, they would come out and wreak havoc. Chapter 1184. This had always been Mutism III's greatest worry, and there were even times when he found it hard to sleep at night. But now that he thought about it, although the Tang people had come with a fierce momentum, they had succeeded in drawing out all the hidden rebels and survivors. Just like the high priest had said, as long as he could pacify them and wait for the army to arrive, he might be able to wipe them all out in one fell swoop. If he could use this opportunity to wipe them out, then even if the Tang people seized his weak point and extorted 1 billion taels of gold, it would still be acceptable. This was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Mutism III's pupils constricted, and he instantly fell silent. His eyebrows moved slightly as he lowered his head, a thoughtful look appearing in his eyes. Healer, how long will it take for the soldiers to arrive? The Caliph of Arabia, Mutism III, suddenly turned his head to look at the steel-like Arab governor kneeling on the ground. He had not said a single word this entire time. The empire's white corpse, Healer. Although he was not as powerful or as famous as the Arab war god Qutayba, he had forged his reputation through battle after battle. His skin was so pale that it made him seem like a corpse. But even so, in the eyes of the Arabian Empire and the surrounding countries, Healer's reputation was no less than that of the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim. From a certain perspective, he was even more ruthless and bloodthirsty than Abu Muslim. Most of the opponents who had fallen into his hands had died horribly. Now that Qutayba had died in battle, the most famous governor that had been summoned to Baghdad was probably the empire's white corpse. If they wanted to deal with the 200,000 rebels and Tang soldiers in Khorasan, Healer would be the best commander. This was also why the Caliph Mutism III had subconsciously asked him this question. Your Majesty, if we are fast, we can gather the army in 7 days. But these are all ordinary soldiers, and cannot pose much of a threat to the thick walls of Khorasan. If we want to gather enough soldiers and top-class great generals to completely destroy the enemy army in Khorasan, we will need 15 to 20 days. Hiller thought for a few moments before finally standing up. We'll march through the night. In 10 days at most, the entire army must reach Khorasan. I will not permit these eastern infidels to remain in Khorasan for another day. The Caliph of Arabia, Mu'tasim III, turned his head and spoke in an unquestionable tone. Yes, sir. Hiller only hesitated for a moment before saying without the slightest hesitation. Time was short, and it was almost impossible to gather enough soldiers from the other Arab war zones to reach Khorasan in time. Although the empire's white corpse Hiller was pressed for time, and the mission was arduous. As long as the army marched day and night, it was not impossible. Moreover, it would only require a few casualties. Because to Hiller, these were not his concerns. Rumble, the bitter defeat in the east, the death of Qutayba, the fall of Khorasan, and Wang Chong's threats. All of these events had enraged the Arabian Empire and caused it to mobilize its soldiers. Not only did the atmosphere of war not weaken, it became even more intense. Lord Protector General, the next Arab city is only several dozen li from us, and the defenses there are weak. As long as we are willing, our 200,000 soldiers can cross the Tigris River and occupy that city without shedding a single drop of blood. General Bahram also said that if we go west from there are 10 some cities, and the land between the cities is flat with no natural defenses. If we want to, we can quickly occupy these Arabian territories. Why has Milord stopped at this time and ordered the army to rest? In the domed hall of Khorasan, the fourth commander of the Anshi Protectorate Army, Lu Shi, couldn't help but ask. The palaces of the Arabs were magnificent, their domed roofs covered in all sorts of delicate vine-like carvings, and their marble floors were completely different from those of the Central Plains. There were even many pearls and agate embedded in the floor, a luxurious sight to behold. But at this moment, whether it was Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuan Qingli Sai, the Black Armored Guard, Su Hanshan, Shui Qianjun, or anyone else in the hall, all of them focused on Wang Chong. If they were willing, they could take over 10 some Arab cities at their fingertips. But Wang Chong had stopped at a time like this. None of them could understand why. Haha, let me ask all of you. We've been marching west from Talas to Samarkand, and then to Khorasan, suffering so many casualties. Just why? Is it just for war? Wang Chong faintly smiled. Everyone in the hall was stunned by these words. No one had expected Wang Chong to ask this question. Most of the people in the hall were generals. As generals, weren't they born for war? Wasn't the purpose of their existence to win this war? At this moment, everyone couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Wang Chong silently smiled as he took in everyone's reactions. War was an art. It was a method, not an end. In every battle, one had to understand its goal and meaning. This was how one considered war on a strategic level. Judging from the reactions of the people in the hall, this concept of war clearly surpassed that of this era. The duty of a general is to win the war, but we've already defeated the Arabs. So do we still need to continue fighting? We've already lost more than 100,000 soldiers. Do we need to fight to the last man? Wang Chong swept his gaze over the crowd. Everyone was momentarily speechless at Wang Chong's words. Although the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia had ended with the Tang dynasty's victory, even pushing all the way to Khorasan and into the heart of the Arabian Empire, not far from the imperial capital of Baghdad, directly threatening this massive empire, the Tang dynasty had also paid an enormous price. A general should lead the army to victory. If this wasn't the duty of a soldier, what else could it be? The goal of war was not to kill, nor was it to fight for the sake of fighting. Everything was for profit. Only when there was profit to be gained could a war continue. Could it be of use to the people of the country, and not become a burden? Throughout history, it was precisely because wars were purely about killing that they were criticized for being overly aggressive, and even dragging down the entire country. Emperor Wu of Han fought in the north and south, his accomplishments in both administration and martial arts unparalleled in the world. He was hailed as the eternal emperor, but in his later years, He was criticized for his shortcomings, resulting in the weakening of the country. War involves many aspects, and it is extremely vast. Manpower, resources, weapons, soldiers, and rations are all extremely costly. So the Confucians have attacked in every possible way. This is the reason why it is said that civil and military officials despise each other, and that civil and military officials do not get along. If a war does not bring benefits to the empire, no one will support it. Wang Chong sternly said to the people behind him. The conflicts between the civil and military officials had existed for a very long time, spanning through history and dynasties. Each time they erupted, the imperial court would be shaken, and even an empire might collapse. If one carefully examined the issue, the root cause was not the difference between the civil and military officials, nor was it because the civil officials were refined while the military officials were crude. The root cause was that a war could not bring any benefits to an empire. It was not just the civil officials. In the eyes of everyone else, war was a kind of consumption. It consumed war horses, livestock, rations, and countless lives. Everything about it was negative. Once a war broke out on the border, the generals would go on a long expedition and launch a defensive counterattack. In the end, they would defeat the enemy and obtain victory, but they would not lose points, not gain points. On the whole, the army in war would always give people a negative impression, always accompanied by death. Or to put it another way, once a war began, it meant that soldiers and rations were being wantonly collected, causing panic among the people. But if war could bring benefits, enormous benefits that benefited the common people, then everything would be different. If this problem was not addressed at its root, the conflict between civil and military officials would never end, and war would again and again reach a dead end. The hall was eerily still, everyone silent. Even Gao Xianji had a pensive look on his face. Not even Gao Xianji had ever considered Wang Chong's words. Soldiers were already used to war. Once they had the upper hand, the most important thing to do was strike while the iron was hot, and continue to expand their gains. They were not like Wang Chong, who clearly had the power to break through some cities, but chose to restrain the army and prepare for battle. Instead, he was proposing peace talks with Arabia, using some Arab cities as leverage to demand compensation for the war. Let alone the several thousand years of history of the Central Plains. Such a form of war had never been seen before in the entire history of the continent. It had to be said that Wang Chong always had many new and interesting things to think about. But Wang Chong, 1 billion taels of gold is such an enormous sum. Will the Arabs really agree to it? Cheng Qianli couldn't help but ask, his brows slightly creased. He had personally drafted this letter, and Lu Shi had written it. He had read it and sent it, so he knew all of its contents. 1 billion taels of gold was a sum that even he had been flabbergasted when he first saw it. If this much gold was piled up, it would truly be a mountain, enough to buy a large number of cities. Would the Arabs really agree to such a sky-high price? At the start, Cheng Qianli had believed that this was just one of Wang Chong's strategies, for the sake of some larger strategy, but it now appeared that he was completely serious. Ha, why not? Wang Chong looked at the people in the hall and confidently said. Chapter 1185. In addition, we have another option, which is to give up on the other cities and head straight for the Arabian capital of Baghdad. With our abilities, we should be able to reach the vicinity of Baghdad by more than 2,200 kilometers. Although they might not be able to take that city, they were more than enough to threaten the Arabian capital and shake the entire Arabian Empire, leaving them with the most humiliating mark in history. Not even 1 billion taels of gold would be enough to buy back this humiliation. In addition, if my guess is correct, the Arabs will most likely pretend to agree to our request and send over 1 billion taels of gold to buy time for the other armies to think of a way to defeat us. Thus, no matter what, they will out. Wang Chong's expression was confident, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 June. Wang Chong never fought a battle he was not confident in. While the threat of war and the demand for reparations were very novel in this world, they had long ago become the norm in the other world. and it had even led to the rapid rise of several peoples in that other world. War required profit, and this protracted war had lasted until now. Wang Chong needed a satisfactory number as an answer to present to all levels of society, including the people of the Tang dynasty. As if in response to Wang Chong's words, the flapping of wings rang out in everyone's ears. In the next moment, under everyone's gaze, a huge golden-beaked falcon flapped its wings and descended from the sky. It flew into the hall and landed on the long golden conference table in front of everyone. And on the falcon's leg was a particularly eye-catching rolled-up letter. Buzz! At the sight of this hunting falcon, the hall instantly fell into a deathly silence. Everyone's body trembled, and they revealed shocked expressions. A few of them even stood up. Would the Arabs really agree to 1 billion taels of gold? In that instant, everyone held their breath. Swish! A thin hand reached out from the side and took the letter from the leg of the Arabian hunting falcon. A few moments later, Yuan Shusong's expression became agitated. "My lord, the Arabs have agreed to 1 billion taels of gold. They've really agreed." "What?" A single stone caused 1,000 ripples. Hearing Wen Shuyang's words, everyone in the hall was shocked to the point of standing up. "Let me see." The Arab letter first landed in Gao Xianji's hands, and then Qing Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi Li Sai, and then everyone else in the hall. Other than Wen Shuyang, there were very few people in the hall who could recognize Arabic. This matter was far too shocking at Wang Chong's price of 1 billion taels of gold, and even more shocking at the Arabs' reaction. It was no longer important whether they could recognize the words on the letter or not. They were just confirming it through this method. Even for Gao Xianji, it was unimaginable for him to win 1 billion taels of gold in a war. Even the benefits he gained from attacking Stone Country were far from comparable to this. The difference between them was like clouds and mud in the face of a great wizard. Wang Chong's simple action instantly eclipsed all his previous actions. Wonderful! Qing Qianli clenched his fists, his expression excited. No amount of words could compare to the impact of a single Arab letter. At this moment, everyone suddenly understood Wang Chong's strategic intentions. 1 billion taels of gold. If we write a memorial to the imperial court, no one in the court, including the civil and military officials, will dare to believe it. Even the civil officials, including the Bureau of Personnel, will have a completely different opinion of us. 1 billion taels of gold was an astronomical sum. Even a vice protector general like Qing Qianli couldn't help but be moved. Many soldiers had died in the Battle of Talas, and just the compensation for their deaths was an enormous sum. Qing Qianli had previously considered what he should do. As the leader of these soldiers who had died in battle, every general would protect their subordinates and fight for as many benefits as possible. But now everything had been resolved. However, the Arabs have also put forward a few conditions in their letter. At this moment, a voice rang out beside his ear. Yuan Shusong frowned slightly and said thoughtfully, "You're right. According to the Arabs' conditions, they hope to sign a treaty with us in order to stop the war. The Arabs promise that they will no longer invade the Tang dynasty, but they hope that we will withdraw from Khorasan and return the territory between Khorasan and Samarkand to them. In addition, they will not threaten to attack any other cities." Buzz! The people in the room instantly fell silent at Wen Shuyang's words. They glanced at each other, none of them saying anything. From the perspective of the Tang dynasty, the Arabs' conditions were not impossible to agree to. Exchanging the territory that belonged to the Arabs for 1 billion taels of gold was not a bad deal. Moreover, the Tang dynasty had never fought all the way to Khorasan in the more than 1,000 years since the beginning of the Qin and Han dynasties. This was an unprecedented achievement. At the same time, it was not necessarily a good thing for the great Tang soldiers to be stuck here for a long time in unfamiliar territory. "I object." A cold voice suddenly rang out. Su Hanshan suddenly opened his mouth and said with a cold and hard expression, "If we really agree to the Arabs' conditions, all our previous efforts will have been for naught. There is a first time for everything. We were able to occupy the unfamiliar western regions and operate until now, so we can also occupy Khorasan and firmly control it. No matter what, it's worth a try. Of course not. Wang Chong heartily laughed. Right now, the Arabs coveted the Central Plains and were defeated by us, so they attacked Khorasan and besieged us. In this war, the Arabs are paying 1 billion taels of gold to compensate us for our losses. This is not some equal exchange. It seems like His Majesty Mutasim still doesn't understand his own situation, nor does he understand the attitude a loser should have. General Chung, lead the army across the Tigris River and attack the closest city, Shandar. When we're about to occupy it, withdraw to Khorasan. Let them understand their situation. Understood. Leave this matter to me. Chung Qianli smiled. The development of this war had already surpassed the limits of his understanding, but Chung Qianli had unreservedly trusted Wang Chong. Thus, no matter what Wang Chong said, he would carry it out without hesitation. After discussing a few more details about the defense of the city, the meeting concluded, and the crowd quickly dispersed. Wang Chong, the Arabs still have many experts. Do you really think that they will keep their promise? Once everyone had left, only Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were left in the room. Lord Protector General, you also said that the Arabs still have many intelligent people. How could they really negotiate peace with us? This is just a delaying tactic. Wang Chong firmly said. Arabia was a country of war that delighted in conquest. From the very start, Wang Chong had concluded that they would never truly negotiate peace. So how could there be a peace treaty? But Wang Chong wanted 1 billion taels of gold, and whether the Arabs were willing or not, they had to hand it over. Now was not the time for them to be begging for help. After leaving the conference hall, Wang Chong climbed onto the western wall of Khorasan and looked into the distance. Beyond the wall, he could hear the howling of the Tigris River. This wide river was a natural barrier, an invisible line of defense for Khorasan. From the moment he had first arrived at Khorasan and laid eyes on this river, Wang Chong had sensed its military value. From a certain perspective, Abu Muslim had been correct. Khorasan truly was extremely difficult to break. General, have you ever thought about how we should respond when the Caliph Mutasim III of Arabia sends hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a thunderous rage, as well as countless governors and generals? There will never be any true negotiation with the Arabs. Even if they agree, General will find it very difficult to retreat unscathed. A voice suddenly came from behind him, and it sounded heavy. Haha, so General already knows about our business with the Arabs. Does Great General also believe that we will yield Khorasan and withdraw? Wang Chong faintly smiled, not even turning his head. He had naturally not come to the high walls of Khorasan to admire the grandeur of the Tigris River. There were far too many rivers like this in the Central Plains. Bahram's invitation was the true reason he had appeared here. Of course not, or else I would not have appeared here. Bahram said in somewhat choppy Arabic. Bahram did not speak the language of the Tang dynasty, and Wang Chong did not speak Khorasani. In the end, for the sake of communication, the two had decided to use Arabic. But in the rebel army, everyone has this suspicion. If you retreat, everyone will panic, and this wave of soldiers we gathered with great difficulty will instantly disperse. Moreover, the Arabs will pursue us relentlessly. When the time comes, everyone will suffer grievous losses. Bahram paused for a moment before continuing, a deep concern on his brow. He did not care about the negotiations between the Tang dynasty and the Arabs, nor did he care about the 1 billion taels of gold. From a certain perspective, Bahram even believed that this was a good thing, because only if the Tang dynasty benefited from it would they stay. The Arabs were far too powerful, so powerful that no empire other than the Tang dynasty could contend against them. So many rebel soldiers had been willing to come out this time, because they saw hope in the Tang dynasty. Thus, if the Tang dynasty were to withdraw from Khorasan, one could easily imagine the impact it would have on them. This matter will depend on General's prestige to pacify them. The Tang dynasty will not retreat, at least not without reason. Wang Chong faintly smiled. Chapter 1186. Even someone as experienced and knowledgeable as Bahram was momentarily stunned by Wang Chong's words. not understanding where Wang Chong could be so confident. Wang Chong only faintly smiled, his eyes glancing up at the sky with an unfathomable expression. In addition, if Great General is still worried, I can reveal another matter to Great General. I've already mobilized a large number of ballistae and heavy ballistae from the rear, and the Tang dynasty is also sending more soldiers from the capital. The first batch is already on the way. I believe that it will only take a few months at most to reach Khorasan. There is no harm in General telling this matter to the leaders of the rebel army. This will at least dispel some of their doubts and make them believe in the resolve of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong sternly said. Bahram's expression froze at Wang Chong's words, and then he gave a long sigh. General's words are enough. I will personally go and pacify them. Bahram quickly took his leave. The winds howled over Khorasan, howling like ghosts. Compared to before, the weather was even colder. Other than Wang Chong, no one knew that an unprecedented crisis was silently approaching, one that would be even more ferocious than many people imagined. Heh! Wang Chong faintly smiled and quickly descended the walls. In Khorasan, upon learning that the Tang dynasty was conscripting soldiers, the unease in the hearts of the rebel army quickly faded away. Half a day later, a brief but intense conflict erupted in Shandar, which was across the Tigris River from Khorasan. Cheng Qianli's army had captured Shandar, and after destroying the Arab garrison and several dozen buildings, it had swiftly retreated to Khorasan. This was a demonstration against the Arabs. The Tang dynasty was using this method to express its will. If the Arabs did not agree to the Tang dynasty's conditions, this probing attack would become a complete annihilation. Several days later, when the news reached Baghdad, it unsurprisingly enraged all the Arabs. Bastard! In his own palace, the caliph even accidentally strangled his favorite hunting falcon to death. But even so, Wang Chong's strategy worked. The Arab gold was transported out of Baghdad overnight, carried by more than 1,000 warhorses toward Khorasan. A much softer letter was swiftly sent to Khorasan. But at the same time, the Arabs were mobilizing their soldiers with greater frequency. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were marching day and night from various Arab war zones to Khorasan. Nearly half of the Arab governors had been driven by the furious caliph to Khorasan. This was an unprecedented march. The Tang dynasty's repeated actions had thoroughly infuriated the supreme ruler of Arabia. The Arab gold arrived much faster than expected. When the thousands of warhorses carrying mountains of gold crossed the Tigris River and were delivered into Khorasan, the army was immediately thrown into a frenzy. On the same day, Cheng Qianli wrote a memorial to the imperial court in the name of Wang Chong and Gao Xinji. 7 or 8 days later, when the news reached the Tang dynasty's capital, it caused a massive uproar. How could this be? The Qixi Protector General and Anxi Protector General actually obtained 1 billion taels of gold from Arabia. Even the Grand Preceptor, who had opposed Wang Chong the most, could no longer sit still upon hearing this news. War had always been a burden on the empire, each time resulting in grievous casualties and the expenditure of the nation's crossbows. But he had never imagined that at the final moments of the war, Wang Chong and the others would repay the imperial court with 1 billion taels of gold. Even the Grand Preceptor, who was never one to show his joy, couldn't help but be dumbstruck. 1 billion taels. And it's in gold. How could this be? Not even 10 years of my Tang dynasty's taxes were this high. Everyone in the Bureau of Revenue, from the minister to the secretary, was stunned by this news. In every war, the Bureau of Revenue was always strapped for cash and racked its brains for a solution. For this reason, of the 6 departments, the Bureau of Revenue was the most opposed to the army. But 1 billion taels of gold, heavens! This was an astronomical sum. With this sum, the Bureau of Revenue would not need to worry about wars for a very long time. This tiny country is actually this rich. King Qi was also stunned when he heard the news from Khorasan. In his mind, Arabia had always been an insignificant country, not even worth mentioning. Thus, when he heard that Wang Chong and the others had obtained 1 billion taels of gold as reparations, he was dumbstruck. As a member of the imperial family, King Qi had never lacked for money, and he would always throw out large amounts of gold and silver to win over the civil and military officials. But no matter how proud he was of his wealth, he did not have 1 billion taels of gold. In the face of this astronomical sum of treasures, even King Qi paled in comparison, becoming insignificant. In the imperial court, the imperial censors, who had always been the most demanding, were also speechless at this moment. None of them could say a word. Putting aside the matter of the capital, in the distant Khorasan, opening the seal on power requires user to expend 10,000 points of destiny energy. Asking again, does user confirm? In the city of Khorasan, the Stone of Destiny's voice resounded in Wang Chong's mind. Wang Chong was currently seated cross-legged in an empty room, but in front of him were 5 golden balls of light, displaying the words mind, body, energy, technique, and power. Wang Chong's eyes were fixed on the final ball of light representing power. Force represented luck, terrain, and celestial phenomena. Wang Chong had long ago learned from the Stone of Destiny that the final reward contained luck, terrain, weather, and many other complicated things. The right time, the right place, and the right people were all part of power. This was the ability of the Stone of Destiny's final reward. Whether or not I can take advantage of power will depend on whether the Stone of Destiny's reward is as I imagine it to be. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. Confirm. With a thought, Wang Chong chose to pay the destiny energy and open the seal on power. Rumble. The moment Wang Chong confirmed, the entire room with Wang Chong at the center began to rumble, and the entire world seemed to tremble. A moment later, the earth rumbled, and in Wang Chong's perception, the entire world began to churn. Everything vanished, and Wang Chong sensed a trembling shadow rapidly expanding. In the blink of an eye, it had transformed into a continent beneath his feet. Bang! An enormous energy exploded in Wang Chong's mind. In a flash, Wang Chong felt like time, space, and everything else had vanished. Even Wang Chong's body had completely vanished, leaving behind only his perception. Beneath him, the shrunken piece of land rapidly expanded, becoming 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times its original size. On this undulating piece of land, many things rapidly materialized. Whoosh! A river flowed across the continent, and Wang Chong could even see the spray of water rising and falling. Next to the river, even more changes were taking place. This is Khorasan. Wang Chong immediately recognized it. On the western side of the continent, a small city had sprung up from the ground like bamboo shoots after a spring rain, bordering the river on the side. Wang Chong was already extremely familiar with Khorasan, and Wang Chong saw more and more familiar things. Fluttering banners, mini barracks, and many domed buildings the size of ants. If this was Khorasan, then there was no question that the river next to it was the Tigris River. As he traveled west, Wang Chong could see the entire continent. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen the Arabian Empire in this manner, and it gave Wang Chong an extremely strange feeling. I wonder how the Arab soldiers are doing? Wang Chong suddenly thought. A moment later, Wang Chong's eyes began to move westward, surveying Baghdad and the other war zones to the west. As if responding to Wang Chong's thoughts, he could hear the sounds of fighting and the cries of soldiers. On this projection of the continent, Wang Chong could clearly see tens of thousands of war horses marching from various parts of the Arabian Empire to Khorasan. It was unknown how many soldiers and horses were rushing over day and night. In comparison, the 200,000 soldiers in Khorasan paled in comparison. 700,000, no, at least 800,000 soldiers. Even though Wang Chong had mentally prepared himself and knew that the caliph would be enraged by his threats, this number still left Wang Chong stunned. Over the course of the Battle of Talas, including the Arab militias they had eliminated, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji had killed nearly 800,000 soldiers. This was a number that any empire would find difficult to endure, and it had even surpassed the total number of soldiers the empire could muster. But even after suffering such a heavy blow, Arabia had still been able to gather 700,000 to 800,000 soldiers. This sort of mobilization ability and reserve of soldiers was enough to make any faction tremble in fear. Even if a significant portion of these soldiers had been recruited militias, it was still an astonishing number. From this, one could see why Arabia was known as the Kingdom of War. This time, the furious caliph had mobilized almost all of his forces. The 200,000 rebel soldiers in Khorasan would find it very difficult to stop them. But there was no need for Wang Chong to stop them, as he had never thought about using his 200,000 rebel soldiers to fight against all of Arabia. History has already undergone a major change. I hope that that matter will not be affected by this. As this thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, he raised his head to the sky. But a few moments later, Wang Chong's eyes flashed, and he smiled. Although the world had undergone a major change, and not only had he not lost Talas, he had even led an army to Khorasan and pointed his sword at Baghdad. The matter in his memories had not changed in the slightest. The more of you come, the more will die. This time, all of you will pay the heaviest price. With a thought, Wang Chong communicated with the Stone of Destiny's power reward. Is user certain that he wishes to spend 10,000 points of destiny energy to exchange for it? Yes. Chapter 1188. The Arab soldiers had arrived much faster than expected. In just a few days, Wang Chong's scouts and Khorasani spies had reported that more than 300,000 soldiers had gathered more than 100 kilometers from the Tang dynasty, and were rapidly setting up fortifications to guard against any sneak attacks from the Tang dynasty. More and more soldiers were being gathered, and the Arab army was rapidly growing in strength. And from the information they had gathered, the Arabs had gathered at least 2 or 3 imperial great generals. The one who has come is Arabia's empire's white corpse healer. This person has a cruel personality and is extremely patient. More importantly, this person's army is extremely meticulous, and his defenses are practically watertight. If we try to force our way in, we'll find it very difficult to gain the upper hand. Bahram's voice came from next to Wang Chong, who was standing next to him and explaining. Bahram knew all the Arab generals and governors like the back of his hand. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty could not compare. Many of the information that Wang Chong had obtained had actually come from Bahram. Haha, even the tightest defense has its flaws. It all depends on the choice. Wang Chong faintly smiled. The Tang dynasty had won the Battle of Talas with 100,000 against 500,000, and the enemy only had 300,000. Wang Chong had never underestimated any opponent, but even the Arab war god Qutayba had died to his sword, so why would he fear a trifling empire's white corpse? No matter how powerful healer was, he could never surpass Qutayba. Bahram froze for a moment, and then he nodded. The empire's white corpse healer was no nameless individual. The only person who could speak of healer in such a manner in front of him was probably Wang Chong. But Bahram was also well aware that this young commander was completely different from any other person he had ever met. All the incredible opportunities that had happened to him gave him the confidence to say these words in front of everyone. Xue Qianjun, write a letter for me to the Caliph of Arabia. Say that the two sides have already signed an agreement, and that Arabia has sent 300,000 soldiers to Khorasan. This makes us feel threatened, a naked betrayal. You have 1 day to withdraw your army from the cities. Otherwise, don't blame us for sending troops to uphold the agreement. Wang Chong replied without turning his head. Hearing Wang Chong's words, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli and everyone else around smiled. The great Tang had long ago seen through all the thoughts and schemes of the caliph, and there were no secrets to speak of. It was just that the Arabs were still pretending to be deaf and dumb, pretending not to know. Understood. A voice came from behind him, and Xue Qianjun bowed and quickly left. Flap flap. Several carrier pigeons took off into the air, one for Baghdad, while the other for the Arab white corpse, and the 300,000 Arab soldiers. Boom! The letter from Wang Chong was like a boulder falling to the ground, and the 300,000 soldiers in the Arab camp instantly began to seethe. Bastard! This is intolerable bullying. The empire's white corpse healer had always been known for his calm and reserved personality, but when he received Wang Chong's letter, he couldn't help but slam his fist on the table, his eyes spitting fire. The Tang people had already obtained 1 billion taels of gold from the Arabs, and now they were trying to take advantage of the situation by questioning the Arabs. This was simply intolerable bullying. The Arabs had always revered bravery, and it had always been the small and weak countries that had to look up to them. This was the first time they had been so openly threatened. "My lord, what do we do? They've given us 1 day to withdraw from the cities. Do we really have to agree?" A voice suddenly came from the side. It was one of Hiller's escorts, his head lowered and his voice cautious. The Arabs had already gathered an army of 300,000 here, outnumbering the enemy by 100,000. In normal circumstances, they would have been able to ignore them. But everyone knew that more than 100 li away, garrisoned behind the walls of Khorasan, were the 200,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty and the Khorasani army. Based on their past records, even if they had 100,000 more soldiers, they would not necessarily be able to defeat them. Impossible. The Empire's white corpse Hiller's eyes spat fire as he immediately refused. "No one can threaten the Arabs like this. Pass on my order to tighten the defenses. I'd like to see just what they can do to us." "Yes." The adjutant received the order and quickly turned to leave. "Wait a moment." Hiller suddenly called out to his deputy. He took in a deep breath, his expression much calmer. "Write a letter for me to reply to the Tang dynasty. Arabia has no intention of breaking the agreement with the Tang dynasty. The mobilization of soldiers this time is only a normal mobilization of soldiers and a necessary precaution. I hope that the Tang dynasty will not think too much about it." The deputy was flabbergasted, but he quickly understood, lowered his head, and vanished from the hall. Flap flap. An hour later, an Arabian hunting falcon soared into the sky, leaping over a tributary of the Tigris River and landing in Khorasan. In just 5 minutes, Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and Li Sai had all gathered together. After reading the letter, all of them had expressions of interest on their faces. Everyone knew what the Arabs were up to and what plan they were currently carrying out. "Lord Protector General, how should we reply to this letter?" Shi Yuanqing suddenly broke the silence. "Reply? Do we even need to reply? The Arabs don't think that we'll accept such a far-fetched reason, do they?" Wang Chong heartily laughed. The Arabs were playing with words. Everyone understood what they were preparing. Since they knew that they were preparing for war, Wang Chong would not be so foolish as to allow them to smoothly assemble their soldiers. "Great General Bahram, General Cheng Li Sai, get ready. We are going to meet with the Empire's White Corpse Great General," Wang Chong said. Bahram, Cheng Qianli, and the others nodded, a faint smile on their lips. Several hours later, in the city of Shirfan, 100 li from Khorasan, countless Arab soldiers had gathered, their sabers as thick as a forest. The 300,000 soldiers were brimming with killing intent, ready to engage in a large-scale battle at any moment. "Be careful. Everyone get to your positions. Order the craftsmen to work day and night. If they can't build 5,000 new barracks by tomorrow, immediately kill half of them. Hurry and feed the war horses. 5 days from now, we will be fighting with the Tang people." Whip after whip cracked through the air, as the Arab generals fiercely lashed the craftsmen and soldiers, urging them to complete the construction of the barracks. Shirfan was not a large city. The 300,000 soldiers had already made the place a little crowded, and there were still another 400,000 to 500,000 soldiers arriving later on. An army of 800,000 required the construction of a large number of facilities. "My lord, the construction within the city is almost complete, and the defenses outside are also in the process of being built. We shouldn't have to worry about the Tang people for the time being." A voice came from behind him, coming from an Arab deputy high up on the walls. Hiller nodded in satisfaction and quickly withdrew his gaze. The enemy this time was extremely powerful. Hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers and great generals like Qutayba had already died at their hands. All of Arabia, including Hiller, was extremely apprehensive of the Tang people, and all of them were acting as if they were facing a powerful foe. Reporting. As he was thinking, an Arab horseman stirred up a cloud of dust in the distance as he galloped toward him. The scout on the horse had a pale face and looked very flustered. "There's a large group of soldiers heading towards Shirfan." Boom! Hiller and the other Arab governors grimaced at these words. No one had expected that they would dare to challenge the Arabs when they had the upper hand. Bastard! The agreement has just been signed, and 1 billion taels of gold has already entered their city. The ink hasn't even dried yet. Do you think they would dare to tear up the agreement? Hiller was both shocked and infuriated. No one had ever dared to treat the Arabs like this in previous wars. Moreover, the Tang dynasty had just received 1 billion taels of gold, yet they immediately dared to tear up the treaty and deal with them. This was simply going too far. Report. A few moments later, another shout came from the distance, followed by the galloping of hooves. Another Arab scout had a panicked expression on his face as he galloped toward Shirfan. Sir, we've discovered the allied army of 7,000 Tang people and the insurgents outside the city. They're coming toward us, and they're less than 3 miles away from us. So fast. Hearing this, the expressions of everyone on the city wall changed drastically. The two scouts had only needed a few moments to get within 3 li of Shirfan. At this speed, they would soon reach the walls. Arrogant. Too arrogant. An Arab governor on the walls was enraged. The Tang people of the Eastern world were simply too arrogant. It was just one defeat, and the Arabs still had an enormous army and many governors and generals. Hiller's mind was also seething with rage. Everyone hear my order. Without my order, don't act rashly. I want to see just what this commander of the Tang dynasty wants. With Hiller's order, the atmosphere in Shirfan became somber. A few moments later, a cloud of dust began to rise from the distance, accompanied by the galloping of hooves and fierce neighs. Who goes there? Hiller immediately bellowed from a distance of 600 to 700 meters. His voice was brimming with energy, resounding over the entire Shirfan neighborhood like a peal of thunder. Ha ha ha! Is that the Arabian Empire's white corpse Hiller on the walls? Chapter 1189. Who are those people below the walls? Is the name of Lord Governor something you can call out? Before Hiller could speak, an Arab general next to him rebuked him. Ha ha ha, Hiller, to think that you Arabs would have such a day. I have come this time to pass on a message from the Tang dynasty's Chishi Protector General. Immediately lead all the soldiers and withdraw from Shirfan. Otherwise, the Tang will mobilize their soldiers from Khorasan because of your treachery and attack, just like they did with Qutayba, exterminating all of you. Jalali heartily laughed as he gazed up at the walls. Jalali was a Khorasani and a member of the Sassanid dynasty. For so many years, only the Khorasani, who had been oppressed by the Arabs, knew what sort of lives they had lived. In front of the Arabs, all the Khorasani had to be careful and grovel, not even daring to speak loudly. They were true second-class citizens, and the Khorasani had to pay enormous taxes. Not too long ago, they had been able to stand before an Arab army of 300,000 and oppose a powerful governor like Hiller. Impudent. Arrogant. On the high walls, Hiller and the other Arab governors and generals were all enraged by these words. A trifling army of 7,000 dared to act so impudently in front of them? They were seeking death. Someone, send me 20,000 men and horses and kill them all. Hiller's face was as cold as ice as he gave the order. With Hiller's order, the city gates opened, and a group of more than 20,000 Arab soldiers surged out, their expressions cold and aloof, as they charged at the Arab army outside the city. Ha ha, let's go. Outside the walls, Jalali saw that his goal had been achieved, and with a wave of his hand, he led his 7,000 soldiers into the distance. The message has been delivered. All of you do your best. Jalali heartily laughed, his voice still coming from up ahead. Where do you think you're going? The Arab general bellowed when he saw that the Arab army was about to leave after taking advantage of the situation, and he immediately led his army forward. The two armies, one in front and one behind, quickly disappeared into the distance. Damn it! Hurry up and charge forward. Don't let them escape. The Tigris River is right in front. They can't escape. Several li away, the Arab general Abra roared and thrust his scimitar into the rear of his horse, causing the entire army to madly charge forward. But before they could get far, Ney suddenly heard a fierce sound of horses. In the next moment, countless soldiers charged, like a sharp arrow, and stabbed into the army behind Abra. Not good. Retreat quickly. Abra's expression changed. He wanted to lead his army to retreat, but it was too late. It's too late to think of escaping now. All of you, accept your fate. A loud roar came from the front. Jalali, who had been running away with all his might, suddenly drew his sword and led the 7,000-strong army behind him in a counterattack. Rumble! They charged into the Arab formation. In a flash, the Arabs were in chaos. What? Abra's army was wiped out? On the high walls, Hiller was dumbfounded by the news. In just a few moments, Abra's 20,000 soldiers had been completely wiped out. This had happened far too quickly. How many soldiers did the enemy have? Hiller asked, his entire body in shock and confusion. Besides the 7,000 soldiers from before, the enemy also had more than 8,000 people in the rear, for a total of 15,000 soldiers. What? How could this be? Before Hiller could speak, the two Arab governors standing next to him spoke up, both of them in shock. If the enemy had a much greater number of soldiers, they could accept it, but there were only 15,000 soldiers, not even the soldiers they had dispatched. Just how had they managed to kill so many people in such a short time? Was the legend true? Was this the strongest Eastern army in all of history? Even stronger than Qutaybah's army? But how could this be? From the information they had gathered, although the Tang dynasty army had won, it only had 20 to 30,000 soldiers left. And from the composition of that army, the enemy was mainly made up of rebel soldiers that were hiding like rats. When had this motley crew become so formidable? Pass on my order. Send out all the hunting falcons. Only now did Hiller sense that something was wrong. He had originally believed that this was just a small group of soldiers harassing and displaying their might, but it now appeared that this was not the case at all. Flap flap. Countless hunting falcons soared into the sky from Shirfan and began to fly off in every direction. A few moments later, the scouting falcons and scouts reported back with accurate numbers of the enemy's forces. 20,000 soldiers was the exact number, and all the Tang people in Khorasani were heading toward Shirfan at full speed. Pass on my order. 100,000 soldiers will follow me out of the city. I want to personally investigate the strength of these people. Hiller was finally infuriated. One mistake was enough. This time, he wanted to personally deal with the Tang people and the remnants of the dynasty. Boom! The gates opened, and a moment later, 100,000 Arab soldiers surged out of the city. 200,000 soldiers stood behind them, ready to give chase at the slightest sign of trouble. Although only 100,000 soldiers had been dispatched, the two armies cooperated with each other and would not give the enemy any opportunities. Rumble! Not long after Hiller led his army out of the city, a massive golden dragon banner rose over the horizon. War drums began to beat as countless soldiers formed from the Tang people, Khorasani, and other rebel soldiers surged toward Shirfan. In the center of this army was an armored black-haired youth who instantly attracted Hiller's attention. It's him! Hiller's pupils constricted at the sight of that young figure, and his entire face paled. He had never imagined that the young commander of the Tang dynasty would personally take action. From Talaz until now, Hiller and all the Arab soldiers had heard far too much about this young commander. His appearance, temperament, weapon, and armor were all very detailed. Even if they had never seen him in person, they could immediately recognize him after hearing this description. But this was not why Hiller feared and valued him. More importantly, there was no one in the Arabian Empire who did not know that Qutaybah and Ibak had died at his hands. Everyone be careful. This person is probably the youngest commander of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong. Hiller warily said as he looked forward. Hiller's words made the other two Arab governors, Pahlavi and Karim, say nothing, but their eyes shone with deep apprehension. Gallop! A few moments later, the two armies began to approach each other in a cloud of dust. In the end, they were separated by a short distance. Tang people, you betrayed us. You clearly received the gold we paid, but you still broke the agreement. Truly despicable. The Arab governor of Hamadan, Karim, coldly flashed in his eyes as he charged forward to meet the cavalry. Although his reputation and prestige couldn't compare to Qutayba or Abu Muslim, Kailama was definitely one of the most powerful governors of the Arabian Empire. Moreover, Kailama had always had a tough personality, and he showed no fear even in the face of Wang Chong. How could this be considered breaking the agreement? I'm afraid the first to attack will be you guys, not us. A mellow and dignified voice came from the front, as Wang Chong slowly rode forward on his white-hoofed shadow. His expression was calm and unruffled, and his every movement exuded a bearing and strength of character that could make other great generals of the same level pale in comparison. Buzz! All the Arab generals grimaced at these words. From start to finish, it had been the Tang people who had been provoking the Arabs, and even at the very end, it had been the Khorasani who had been too impudent. But if one seriously looked into the matter, it truly had been the Arabs who had attacked first. Bastard! It was clearly you who set up an ambush to lure us over. You've been planning this for a very long time. An Arab general next to Hiller finally couldn't help but harshly rebuke him. If we hadn't made sufficient preparations, those 7,000 soldiers would have been completely slaughtered by you. At this moment, Xue Qianjun stepped forward from behind Wang Chong and cursed. You! The Arab general was instantly at a loss for words. Although everyone knew that those 7,000 soldiers had been bait, Xue Qianjun was right. If the Tang dynasty hadn't been one step ahead, the Arab army would have already returned in triumph. There's no need to say any more. Hiller extended an arm and stopped the general behind him. Urging his horse forward, he glared at Wang Chong said, "The Tang people, you are also a famous general of your generation. Is the Tang dynasty this untrustworthy?" Heh! Wang Chong faintly chuckled as he urged his horse forward, a disdainful look on his face. Trustworthy or untrustworthy, honoring the agreement or breaking it, that's not up to you to decide. Didn't I already tell you? Within 1 day, you must withdraw from Shirfan. Since you won't abide by it, you will naturally be the first to break the agreement. Don't blame me for leading my army west and attacking you. Hiller paled at these words. As the most powerful empire in the west, when had it been forced into such a state? I'll count to 3. I'll give you 3 seconds. If you don't withdraw by then, prepare to die. Wang Chong extended a finger, his entire body exuding a domineering aura. 1, 2, 3. Before Hiller could react, Wang Chong extended a third finger, and a moment later, the 20,000-some Tang, Khorasani, and other rebel soldiers roared and charged forward. Hiller's eyes lit up, and Wang Chong's eyes flickered as he raised his third finger. Domineering. Too domineering. Chapter 1190. Kail. Kail. Battle cries rang out as the army of 20,000 surged forward like a raging river, forming a vast torrent of steel that charged at the other side. This is absurd. Even though Hiller was known as the Empire's white corpse, his pale face devoid of emotion, he was so angry that his blood began to boil. No matter how formidable the enemy was, they were only 20,000 soldiers, all of them made of flesh and blood. Could they really fight 100 against 100,000? Moreover, even if they left, Shirfan was not far behind them, and there were still 200,000 soldiers inside. Kill them! Hiller's face was as cold as ice as he unsheathed his sword and gave the order to attack. Bang! The earth quaked as the 100,000 Arab soldiers roared and charged at the Tang people, Khorasani, and other rebel soldiers. Boom! The two armies, 20,000 against 100,000, fiercely clashed, causing the earth to quake in shock. But this battle was destined to have nothing to do with the intensity that Hiller had imagined. As the two armies collided like behemoths, Ney and the Tang dynasty's flanks drew long arcs across the battlefield, stabbing into the Arab army from the left and right. Meanwhile, a group of cavalry from the center of the army of 20,000 charged out like a sharp sword, piercing through the Arab ranks. Cutting formation. The moment they charged into the enemy ranks, the several thousand Wuxian cavalry scattered like blossoms, transforming into countless sharp blades that cut through the enemy's ranks. In the blink of an eye, the 100,000 Arab soldiers had collapsed into chaos, and all of this had taken place in just a few seconds. Bastard! Kill them! The Empire's white corpse healer was infuriated by this sight. For any army, the collapse of the main force would be fatal. Although the enemy was fierce, they were far from invincible. In terms of numbers, the Arabs still had the advantage, and they still had 200,000 soldiers in the cities in the rear, ready to charge out at any moment. But just when Healer was still holding out hope, clang! In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, there was the sound of metal clanging. Before anyone could react, an invisible energy spread out, and something that shocked and even horrified everyone happened. Clang, clang, clang. The halos around the 100,000 soldiers rapidly weakened, and their auras continued to drop at an alarming rate. What's going on? What the hell happened? Why has my strength dropped so much? Be careful! That the entire battlefield was thrown into chaos. This sudden development had dealt a far greater blow to the Arab army than the Wuxian cavalry's cutting formation. The former was a physical slaughter, while the latter was a psychological panic that caught people off guard. And this was only the beginning. A moment later, there was another clattering of metal, and this time, it was the Arab general's turn to plummet in strength. Ah! A burst of chaotic screams came from behind them. Everyone turned their heads, only to find that the chaotic screams were coming from Shurfan City, which was far behind them. In a flash, Healer and all the other governors and great generals grimaced. No one had expected the enemy's attack range to be so large. Not just the 100,000 soldiers at the front, but the 200,000 soldiers in the rear, who were not participating in the battle, were also affected. The bane of the battlefield halo, the bane of generals halo, Wang Chong, riding atop his white-hoofed shadow, smiled and unleashed his two strongest war halos. Unlike the top-class armies and elites led by Qutayba and Osman, the Arab soldiers were far less elite, and they were much more affected by the effects of the fog. The bane of the battlefield halo and the bane of generals halo had never been invincible. As long as an expert of the great general level took action and expended energy, they could still weaken the effects of these halos. But would Wang Chong give them such a chance? Hurry! Use the great general halo to weaken these two halos. Pahlavi bellowed in both shock and fury. Although he didn't know what sort of halo his foe was using, he was still a governor of Arabia, a great general expert. Pahlavi was able to quickly determine how to deal with it. However, before he could finish his words, the earth rumbled. In an instant, everyone felt an enormous aura suddenly rise up from the ground like a tsunami, heading toward the three of them at an astonishing speed. Since you won't retreat, then you will remain here forever. Wang Chong's voice, suffused with a bone-chilling chill, resounded through the world like the god of death announcing their fates. Impudent! The three of them looked up at the sky at the same time, but before Healer could react, the Arab governor to his right, Kailamo, furiously leaped into the air. Clang, clang, clang. As he flew into the air, black and red halos exploded from his body. Kailamo, watch out! Healer grimaced at this sight. Of all the Arab governors, Karim had never been the most patient. His hot-tempered personality had become a fatal danger at this moment. No one knew better than him that this Eastern youth was far more valiant than any of the imperial great generals of the conquered countries they had encountered before. This was not something that Karim could deal with alone. Bang! With no time to think, Healer's body exploded with energy and shot into the sky like a cannonball. Roar! The moment he soared into the sky, a demonic roar resounded through the world. Behind Healer, the air rippled, and a ghastly white foot suddenly emerged from the depths of the void, followed by a pale white figure stepping out of the void. As everyone watched, a ghastly white corpse more than 30 meters tall appeared behind Healer. Upon seeing this corpse, everyone suddenly understood why Healer was called the Empire's White Corpse. Howl! The moment it appeared, the eyes of the giant pale corpse suddenly shot out two balls of light that were like scorching suns. At the same time, it let out a bloodthirsty and brutal howl. The howl contained a strong spiritual fluctuation that shot out in all directions. In a flash, fear appeared in the eyes of all the surrounding people. This was an instinctive fear, like ants encountering a more powerful life form. Trembling, they began to flee, not even the Arabs able to avoid it. As the Arab governor, the empire's white corpse healer's style of battle was completely different from that of the other governors. The giant corpse that healer had summoned possessed powerful psychic energy, and the howl of fear it let out was enough to make even Saint Martial experts tremble and feel a deep dread in their souls. But before the empire's white corpse healer could let out a howl of fear, a moment later, boom! A vast and terrifying energy that caused even the world to lose its splendor suddenly erupted and struck the giant pale corpse. The giant corpse trembled and then grabbed his head with both hands, as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. His energy had also fallen into disarray. Not only that, the two suns of light in the giant corpse's eyes rapidly dimmed and dimmed. The empire's white corpse healer groaned, blood flowing out of his ears, nostrils, and eyes. That avatar was not just an avatar, but his life. An injury to the avatar was no different from an injury to him. Psychic energy. A hint of fear finally appeared in healer's eyes. His hell-white corpse had always been an extremely powerful psychic energy technique. Not even Saint Martial experts could withstand it, much less others. But healer had never imagined that his opponent's psychic energy was even stronger than his own. Ahem! At almost the same time, he heard a series of groans. Healer was far from the only one affected by Wang Chong's psychic energy attack. To the left and right, Pahlavi and Karim were both assaulted, their psychic energy thrown into disarray. Even their techniques were affected by this psychic attack, causing them to clearly stagnate. Psychic storm. This was an evolved technique that Wang Chong had comprehended from Mazel's Thorn of Darkness. The Thorn of Darkness was a technique that could be used against a single opponent, but Wang Chong had evolved it into a psychic energy technique that could be used against multiple opponents. Even against multiple Saint Martial experts, it could still deal a massive blow to their minds and souls, throwing them into disarray. Great destruction art. A cold and emotionless voice resounded in the ears of all the Arabs. Before they could react, Wang Chong had used the strongest technique of the great Yin-Yang heaven creation art. Not good. Careful. The moment Wang Chong attacked, everyone felt an enormous fear, but it was too late. Boom, boom, boom. In the blink of an eye, a huge airflow whizzed down from the sky and violently hit the ground. In the sky, there was a loud noise, and several figures were sent flying like kites with their strings cut. Run! Healer's face was covered in fear as he fled. If one looked carefully, one of his arms was limp at his side, blood gushing out of it. Healer had actually been injured in a single blow. A destructive energy was wreaking havoc in his body. And in just a few moments, Healer had tried several dozen times to expel a strand of this energy, but he had failed every time. Impossible. Just what kind of energy could be so terrifying? Healer's heart thumped in fear. He had originally believed that no matter how powerful his opponent was, he would only be on the same level as Abu Muslim. But not even Abu Muslim could defeat him like this. But before Healer could get very far, he heard a shrill wail. Ah! Before Healer could react, an enormous aura vanished from his senses. Pahlavi. Healer's heart sank as a thought flitted through his mind. I said long ago that you were seeking death. Chapter 1191. Lord Governor. At that moment all was silent. The entire battlefield seemed to have quietened down. Imperial great generals were lofty existences in the eyes of the soldiers, existences that they could only look up to and could not touch. No one had expected Pahlavi to be killed by Wang Chong in a single clash. With Pahlavi dead, the halo of energy around his body rapidly vanished, and Wang Chong's Bane of the Battlefield and Bane of Generals halos once more swept over the battlefield. Kill! The 20,000-some Tang people, Khorasani, and other rebel soldiers charged into the battlefield. Pahlavi's death, and the effects of the Bane of the Battlefield and Bane of Generals halos, instantly caused the army of 100,000 to crumble. Go! Hurry and go! The army of 100,000 was routed, and began to flee. Everyone hear my order! Kill them! Bahram unsheathed his sword and gave the order. The 8,000-some Aswaran cataphracts charged at the Arab army of 100,000. Clang clang clang. As they charged, one halo after another rumbled under their feet, each of the Aswaran cataphracts like a moving fortress. Boom! 1, 2, 3, 7 or 8 Arab horsemen were thrown high into the air by the Aswaran cataphracts. The enormous impact caused the bones of these Arab soldiers to creak and crack, all of them severely injured. Clang! There was a cold flash of light as the swords of the Aswaran cataphracts moved with incredible speed, beheading 4 or 5 of the Arab horsemen before they could even land. So fast, even Wang Chong couldn't help but show a hint of praise in his eyes. The Aswaran cataphracts of the Sassanid dynasty had a heavy aura, and their attacks were fierce and violent. Some were fast, some slow, some heavy, some light. Their skill in battle had reached the pinnacle, and in some aspects, not even the Mamelukes could compare. They were not even that inferior to the Wuxian cavalry. Even if the Wuxian cavalry's Wuxia steel swords and meteoric steel armor were still in existence that any Aswaran cavalryman would envy. Pass down my order. All troops attack with all your might. Remember, don't let the 100,000-strong army have any breathing space. Wang Chong's body swayed, and he quickly descended from the sky as light as a feather. With the momentum set, Wang Chong led his army in pursuit of the Arab army. Wang Chong was in no rush to advance. Instead, he used the disarray of the 100,000 Arab cavalry to charge into the city and break the formation of the other 200,000 soldiers. Neither Hiller nor Karim had expected Wang Chong to be so decisive. If the Arabs wanted to attack the 200,000 rebel soldiers, they would have needed to be somewhat discreet. But Wang Chong had no such misgivings, and his tactics made Hiller feel a deep sense of helplessness. The Arabs clearly had the advantage in numbers, more than 10 times that of their foes, but every time Hiller wanted to mobilize his army and use this advantage in numbers to wear them down, this army of around 20,000 would always be able to find a weak point in the Arab army. Just one attack was enough to make all of Hiller's efforts go to waste. Once, twice, thrice, the 20,000 rebel soldiers were like the precise scalpel of a surgeon, cutting down the 300,000 Arab cavalry time and time again, causing the Arabs to fall into chaos and collapse. They even used their soldiers to block their own people, causing even greater chaos. This pursuit lasted for more than 100 li, with repeated clashes in the middle, until finally, Hiller was in complete despair. Retreat! With Hiller's order, all the soldiers madly fled, abandoning all resistance. As they pursued north and south, the army of 20,000 killed more than 100,000 Arab cavalry and drove them for more than 200 li. In the end, they scattered and fled in every direction. Only then did Wang Chong and Bahram withdraw. General, let's retreat. Our men have sent word that even more Arab governors and soldiers are on their way. If this continues, we might be surrounded. Several hundred li from Shirfan, Bahram rode alongside Wang Chong on his monstrous warhorse. As he looked at the young face at his side, a hint of heartfelt admiration flashed through Bahram's eyes. This young Eastern commander possessed the courage, daring, and keen intuition that Bahram had never seen before. Under his command, the 20,000 soldiers could display a power that not even Bahram could compare to. He always knew where the enemy's weakest point was, and could predict them ahead of time. Moreover, each time, he would only send one group of soldiers. He could use the smallest number of soldiers to achieve the greatest effect and neutralize the enemy's counterattack. Although the 300,000 Arab soldiers had attempted to counterattack time and time again, they had been strangled in the cradle by Wang Chong. This was completely different from the military tactics that Bahram was familiar with. When the Empire's white corpse Hiller finally fled, Bahram could clearly see the helplessness on his face, an expression that was even more despairing than when one had been defeated in terms of martial might. Although knowledge is far away in the Central Plains, we must still go and seek it. The Tang people's art of war is probably far superior to that of our Sassanids and the Arabs put together. Perhaps this Tang dynasty from the east is the true ally that we've been waiting for. As Bahram gazed at Wang Chong's chiseled face, he made up his mind. This was the first time he had truly fought alongside the Tang dynasty. Even Bahram would find it difficult to fight 100,000 with 20,000 soldiers. Wang Chong's unfathomable art of command, and the valiant Wuxian cavalry had left an indelible mark on him. It's about time. Let's stop while we're ahead and withdraw. On the other side, Wang Chong had no idea what Bahram was thinking. Looking away from the distance, Wang Chong quickly nodded. This preemptive strike had already taught the Arabs a very good lesson. Moreover, with 20,000 soldiers, killing 100,000 soldiers was also an excellent way to weaken the enemy, greatly reducing the pressure on the Arabs when they finally gathered their main army and reached the walls. Rumble. A few moments later, all the Wuxian cavalry, Aswaran cataphracts, and rebel soldiers had retreated to Khorasan, vanishing without a trace. Bastard! We will definitely tear your corpse into 10,000 pieces. In the distant Baghdad, the Caliph of the Arabian Empire furiously roared upon receiving the news from Shirfan. His voice so furious that it seemed like it would tear apart all of Baghdad. Very quickly, an extremely harsh letter was sent from Baghdad to the distant Khorasan. But to everyone's surprise, the Caliph of the Arabian Empire, Mu'tasim III, very quickly received an even harsher letter. In the letter, Wang Chong pointed out that the Arabs had gone back on their word. On the surface, they had agreed to negotiate with the Tang dynasty, but they were secretly preparing for war. Hiller's actions were a deep offense. Wang Chong stated in the letter that if the Arabs did not apologize for their actions and pay an additional 200 million taels of gold, the Tang dynasty would launch an all-out assault and capture all the Arab cities in the area. Bastard! Upon receiving Wang Chong's letter, Mu'tasim III was so infuriated by Wang Chong's rudeness that he felt like his lungs were about to explode. Who do these bastards think they're talking to? Do they really think that our Arabia is one of those weak countries that they can do whatever they want? 200 million taels is impossible. Simply shameless. But even so, 3 days later, 200 million taels of gold were delivered to Khorasan with astonishing speed, accompanied by a much gentler letter. Ha ha ha. Upon receiving the Caliph's letter, Wang Chong, Gao Xinji Bahram, the King Gonka, Banahan, Li Sai, and Su Hanshan, all of them couldn't help but laugh. The Caliph of Arabia is probably even thinking of killing now. Cheng Qianli placed the letter back on the table and softly chuckled. They have to endure. They're no longer just worried that we'll attack their cities, but that we'll continue to attack them, just like we attacked Shirfan. In the last few days, the sky over Khorasan has been covered with hunting falcons. The Arabian Empire has probably released all their hunting falcons to monitor our movements. This time they're truly afraid. Zhang Ke couldn't help but say, the corners of his lips twitching. After fighting with Wang Chong for so long, this period of time had been the most relaxing and satisfying. As he watched Wang Chong toy with the Arabian Empire, he was clearly infuriated to death, but wave after wave of gold was sent to him. This was an indescribably wondrous feeling. All the unhappiness and frustration that had been building up from the Arabian threat had been swept away. My lord, why don't we think of a way to clear out all the hunting falcons overhead? Zhang Ke eagerly said to Wang Chong. Zhang Ke, don't be so mischievous. The Arabian hunting falcons are not people we can casually touch, and we've already achieved our goal. There's no need for us to send any more soldiers. Suki said. General, at this moment a voice rang out in his ear. Great General Bahram, who had been silent this entire time, suddenly spoke, his words immediately attracting everyone's attention. This one has a proposal, and this is also the wish of the other leaders. We hope to ally with the Tang dynasty, to form a long-term alliance with the Tang dynasty at its head to resist the Arabs. Bahram's words plunged the room into silence. 8,000 to 9,000 Aswaran cataphracts and more cavalry were gathering around them. This was an enormous force, and the Aswaran cataphracts that were approaching 200,000 Aswaran cataphracts. Just like how the Arabs had thought of using Uzun to deal with the Tang dynasty, if the Tang dynasty wanted to establish a foothold in the distant Khorasan, it needed to borrow the strength of these people. At the very least, no one was more capable than them in gathering information. There had never been an alliance like this before, and everyone knew that this was no trifling matter. In a flash, all eyes focused on Wang Chong. Wang Chong said nothing. a hint of imperceptible shock in his eyes as he turned to Gao Xianji. The latter nodded, indicating that Wang Chong was in charge of this matter. Great General Bahram, are you serious? Chapter 1192. Forming an alliance, and forming an alliance with the Tang dynasty at its head were two completely different concepts. The Tang dynasty could not submit to any other faction. If they formed an alliance, it had to be led by the Tang dynasty. But this matter required the willingness of Bahram and the others. But according to Wang Chong's expectations, even if Bahram and the other rebel leaders agreed, they would have to wait until they had completely defeated the Arabs and survived this crisis. That Bahram had so quickly proposed an alliance with the Tang dynasty at its head was truly unexpected. Bahram said nothing, his mind churning with countless thoughts. The matter of forming an alliance with the Great Tang had revolved around his mind for a very long time. And Bahram had also considered whether he should wait until he had successfully withstood the Arab assault before making a decision. After all, if they couldn't hold Khorasan and force back the Arabs, any alliance would be meaningless. But after much consideration, Bahram made his decision. He had personally witnessed the power of the Tang people. If there was one country in the world that could resist the Arabs and help them rebuild the Sassanid dynasty, it could only be the Tang dynasty. Now in the future, and in the next several hundred years, if the Sassanids wanted to survive the Arab assault, they would need the help of the Tang people. Moreover, in his time with Wang Chong, the strength of character, strategy, bearing, courage and insight that Wang Chong exuded had left an extremely deep impression on Bahram. This was a true genius, a saint of the art of war completely different from the god of war Qutayba. For a 17-year-old youth to possess such astonishing talent, Bahram felt a heartfelt admiration and respect. This was also an important reason why Bahram had made this decision ahead of time. Rather than saying that Bahram had chosen the Tang dynasty, it was more accurate to say that Bahram had chosen Wang Chong and believed in Wang Chong. We believe in general. Bahram stared at Wang Chong and said a few simple words. Boom! These 6 words seemed to possess an extraordinary power, causing the entire hall to fall silent. Not even Bahram realized that the moment he said these 6 words, the power structure of the western Song Mountains, from Samarkand all the way to the distant Arabian capital of Baghdad, would be profoundly altered. This was the firmest alliance on the continent. The Sassanids had also become the firmest ally of Wang Chong and the Tang dynasty. From the beginning to the end, his determination was unwavering. A day later, in Khorasan, Wang Chong, Bahram, Gao Xianji, and the other rebel leaders swore an oath of blood, establishing a powerful alliance with the Tang dynasty at its head. Time slowly passed, the weather growing colder by the day. During the day, many parts of Khorasan were covered in a thick layer of frost, and even the surging Tigris River was covered in a thin layer of ice in the early morning. With the arrival of winter, the entire world became somber. From the Song Mountains to Baghdad, there were very few people on the Silk Road, including the Arabian Empire. Everyone had gone into hibernation, in a place 500 to 600 li from Khorasan, in stark contrast to the somber and desolate atmosphere of the world. A dense mass of people spread out for several hundred li under the cold and gloomy sky. In the center of this mass of people were large black banners that blotted out the sun and covered every corner of the world. Is everyone here? Outside a massive tent, the Empire's white corpse, Hewler, rode a white warhorse and coldly said. His gaze was like a bolt of lightning sweeping across the earth. The Arabs were well-trained and well-trained. After a great deal of time, the Arabs had finally gathered their forces on this land. One enormous aura after another soared into the sky from the vast army. Many governors and generals had already gathered in this region, a force that would make anyone apprehensive. My lord, the last governor of Jianan has arrived, and the last group of soldiers has been gathered. All the soldiers have arrived. Hewler's aide respectfully bowed at the waist as he spoke from the side. Buzz! Hewler's eyes exploded with light, many times brighter than before. But Hewler quickly calmed down. Hewler, are you ready? At that moment, a dignified voice rang out from behind him. The voice contained boundless authority and dignity, as well as a tone of condescension. Hiller's body trembled at this voice, and he turned around to look at the source of the voice. "My lord, the 750,000 soldiers have been gathered, and all the governors have gathered here. We can advance on Khorasan at any time, and attack those remnants." Hiller lowered his head and bowed. All was quiet, and if one looked carefully, one would see 3 figures standing in a line, their bodies exuding the auras of mountains and seas. Although Hiller was known as a powerful governor of Arabia, he was clearly dwarfed by these 3, like a child standing before an adult. The 3 titans of black radiance. There had been many formidable governors in Arab history, but before Abu Muslim, the 3 titans of black radiance had been the most famous. They had been the strongest governors of the empire in the east, but they had later retired from the army. Only after they retired did Abu Muslim and Ziyad have the chance to become the most famous governors of iron and blood in the east. Although they had retired from the army, the 3 titans of black radiance still possessed an extremely high prestige in the army. Not even Hiller could compare to them. Qutayba had died in battle, Ibak and Osman had been killed, and even Hiller had been defeated. There was basically no one in the Arabian Empire that could contend against the Tang dynasty's Wang Chong. Thus, they had been forced to invite these 3 renowned figures of the army. "Then let's move out," the head of Black Radiance, Fadi, said. "Leave those top-class Tang dynasty generals in Bahram to us," the Blood of Black Radiance said. The Blood of Black Radiance, Faraz added. "Once the city is breached, kill all the Khorasani. Leave none alive." The Blade of Black Radiance, Imran, said. "Anyone who dares to collude with the infidels of the East should be prepared to die. Khorasan needs a true cleansing." The 3 of them spoke in calm and emotionless voices, deciding the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in Khorasan with just a few words. Boom! With this order, the army began to move. More than 700,000 soldiers, countless governors, and generals surged toward Khorasan, causing the earth to tremble. At the same time, on the western walls of the distant Khorasan, countless figures were gathered, all of them looking in the direction of Baghdad, the atmosphere solemn and respectful. Even though the other side was empty and devoid of people, all of Khorasan was fraught with tension, as if a battle was about to begin. Whoosh! Without any warning, the wide Tigris River outside Khorasan suddenly began to sway. As if its rhythm had been disrupted by some energy, the water splashed and splashed into discordant waves. Rumble! A few moments later, a power emerged from the ground, and everyone on the walls of Khorasan could clearly sense the walls beneath their feet shudder. What's going on? The people on the walls looked around, all of them extremely uneasy. However, in just a short moment, not only did the tremors not weaken, but they also intensified, as if there was an invisible giant hand shaking the entire city underground. "Look over there." Suddenly, a tall Khorasani cried out in alarm as he pointed into the distance. Following this person's gaze, everyone could clearly see a thin black line on the horizon approaching Khorasan. This black line was like a strand of hair at first, but it quickly began to transform. A few moments later, it was like a black wave sweeping toward Khorasan. "Careful, it's the Arabs." A moment later, a horn blared from the walls, shattering the silence of Khorasan. As the war drums thundered, the mood in Khorasan grew tense. In the distance, as if in response to the cries of alarm, a massive black Arab war banner slowly rose from the horizon, its black banner flapping in the wind. "Kyle! Charge!" In the distance, the vast sea of Arab cavalry could see the towering walls of Khorasan. Suddenly, they unsheathed their scimitars and charged toward Khorasan like a flood of steel stretching for several dozen li. "They're finally here?" On the high walls, Wang Chong, wearing the heavenly mandate battle armor, looked down, a faint smile on his lips. He had arrived on the walls of Khorasan the moment he had first heard the tremors. The army before him was so vast and imposing that anyone who saw it would feel a powerful visual impact. It was like the entire world was pressing down on them, instilling a deep fear in them. But to Wang Chong, all of this was within his expectations. "Suki Shueqianjun, are you ready?" Wang Chong said without turning his head. "My lord, everything is ready. All the ballistae and equipment have been inspected." The two replied in unison. "Remember, as long as we can hold out for half a day, and don't let the Arabs break through the gates, we don't need to worry about anything else." Wang Chong indifferently said. His expression was confident, exuding a powerful charisma that made others involuntarily trust him. Understood. The two of them bowed and accepted the order before quickly retreating. "General, are you really sure that we only need to hold out for half a day to survive the Arab assault?" Chapter 1193. He did not doubt Wang Chong, but Wang Chong gave off the feeling that he had a card up his sleeve. It was as if this Arab assault could not threaten Khorasan at all. But other than saying that the Arabs would need to hold out for half a day, Wang Chong had said nothing else. Bahram could not understand why Wang Chong was so confident that he could deal with the Arabs. "Haha, you'll understand when the time comes." Wang Chong faintly smiled. There were some matters that could not be explained too much. The more people that knew, the greater the chances of failure would be. "Su Hanshan, get ready." "Yes." On the city wall, Su Hanshan bowed in acknowledgement and quickly left. Kaklak. A few moments later, Su Hanshan gave the order, and the walls of Khorasan began to rumble with the clattering of gears. After so many days, Zhang Shoji and his craftsmen had worked day and night to repair the ballista bolts they had picked up from the battlefield of Talas. In the end, they had repaired 30,000 ballista bolts and more than 20,000 damaged bolts. These damaged bolts were not as powerful as normal ballista bolts, but they still had 50 to 60% of their original power and could still play an important role on the battlefield. The walls quickly fell silent. Wang Chong, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Wang Fu, the evil emperor, chief of Wuxiang, and the other rebel leaders were all lined up on the walls to observe the situation. The world was overcast, leaving only the howling of the cold winds and the rumbling of the earth. Nay, the neighing of warhorses came from the distance, and in the blink of an eye, a spotless black warhorse led thousands of Arab cavalry toward Khorasan. This abrupt change immediately attracted the attention of countless people. "The Tang people and Sassanid survivors on the walls, listen up. I'll give you one last chance. Open the gates and immediately surrender. Otherwise, the moment the walls fall will be the moment of your death." The brown-bearded Arab general on his black warhorse bellowed, appearing extremely ferocious. Kaklak. The Arab general grabbed a golden bow from his back, knocked an arrow, and fired at the walls of Khorasan. Boom! A streak of light shot through the air, passing over the tributary of the Tigris River, and thundering into the walls of Khorasan, only a few feet from the top of the walls. Buzz! The walls where the arrow had struck had caved in, and the tail of the arrow was trembling. It was clear that an Arab letter had been coiled around it. "Interesting." Wang Chong smiled and extended his palm. The golden arrow stuck in the wall automatically flew out and landed in Wang Chong's hand. Wang Chong lightly flicked his finger and shattered the golden arrow. Then he opened the golden letter of challenge. The contents of the letter were extremely simple, but they were brimming with a menacing aura. "General, the Arabs demand that we immediately disarm and surrender the city. Otherwise, once the city is breached, they will kill all the Khorasani inside. The Arabs want to massacre the city," Bahram said from behind him. Although Wang Chong understood a little Arabic, only Bahram could fluently read the written language of Arabia. After reading the contents of the letter, Bahram turned to Wang Chong and awaited his decision. "Bahram, how much time did the Arabs give us in the letter?" Wang Chong placed his hands behind his back and asked without turning his head. 1 hour. If we don't receive a reply in 1 hour, they will attack the city. In addition, they have sent the 3 titans of black radiance." Bahram's voice was tinged with deep concern. Rumble. As if in response to Bahram's words, the army in the distance parted like a wave, and 3 muscular warhorses, wearing heavy armor, rode out of the sea of Arab soldiers. The 3 of them said nothing, but their bodies exuded an enormous and suffocating pressure. For a moment, even the voices on the walls of Khorasan became much quieter. Although the 3 of them did nothing, Even ordinary martial artists could sense the dreadful auras emanating from their bodies. The three titans of black radiance. Bahram recognized them at a glance. The three of them had thunderous reputations, and in terms of fame and strength, these three titans of Arabia were above Bahram. They had also made their names much earlier than Bahram. Although Bahram had a grim expression, Wang Chang's sleeves fluttered in the wind, his expression relaxed. Didn't the Arabs give us 1 hour to consider surrendering? Tell them that we will seriously consider it. Everyone on the wall was dumbfounded by these words, and even Bahram was dumbfounded. Marquis. At that moment, even Chun Bin didn't know what to say. In addition, tell them that 1 hour is not enough. I need to carefully discuss this with the leaders of the rebel armies, so I need at least 6 hours. Wang Chong added. Buzz. The walls were eerily silent at first, but then they slowly began to understand, smiles appearing on their faces. Understood. Leave this matter to me. Bahram was the first to respond, a smile on his lips. Following that, the others also reacted and laughed. How can 6 hours be enough? Marquis, it should be at least 8 hours. That's not enough. I feel like we need at least 12 hours. That won't do. Think about it. We have so many rebel armies. The people on the walls began to talk, all of them smiling. At this moment, they completely understood Wang Chang's intentions. A few moments later, a letter personally written by Bahram was wrapped around an arrow and handed to a Khorasani master archer. We've already thought it over. Catch! Bahram harshly shouted from the wall. He then turned his head to glance at the master archer next to him. Boom! An arrow flew through the air like a lightning bolt, landing in front of the Arab army and exploding into a cloud of dust and stone. Niai! An Arab horseman charged forward, plucked the arrow from the ground, and then charged back at the three titans of Black Radiance and Healer. The head of Black Radiance, Fadi, opened the letter with a flick of his finger. After glancing at the contents, he frowned. What's wrong? Healer leaned over and glanced at the letter, upon which he frowned just like the three titans of Black Radiance. Opening the gates and surrendering had been just empty words. No one had expected the Tang people to actually agree, only that they needed 8 hours to consider. What do you mean? The head of Black Radiance, Fadi, tossed the letter to Healer. The three titans of Black Radiance were powerful Arab governors with extremely high prestige in the army. If it were just a war, the three of them wouldn't even have furrowed their brows. But the contents of this letter left the three titans dumbfounded, and they didn't know how to react. Healer, what do you think? The blade of Black Radiance, Imran suddenly asked. I also don't know, but this general believes that the Tang people are definitely playing a trick. Healer's brow furrowed in contemplation. So you mean that we should immediately attack Khorasan? The blade of Black Radiance, Imran asked. His face was completely shrouded in a black visor, making it impossible to see his expression. Healer opened his mouth, but he hesitated. He instinctively wanted to say yes, but he swallowed his words. For a moment all was quiet. The three titans of Black Radiance and Healer were silent, all of them stumped by Wang Chang's simple reply. Marquis, look. All four of them are stumped. They definitely didn't expect us to reply, and asked them to seriously consider it. On the distant walls of Khorasan, Shui Qianjun, Su Kui, Chun Bin, and even Su Hanshan were all paying close attention to the Arabs on the banks of the Tigris River. The three titans of Black Radiance and Healer had stopped their horses, as if they had been petrified. It was an extremely comical sight. As expected, Marquis's reply has put these fellows in a difficult position. Chun Bin smiled. Wang Chong, do you think they'll agree? Gao Xinji could not help but ask as he looked into the distance. It doesn't matter if they agree or not. Everything will depend on their own choice. Wang Chong held his hands behind his back and smiled. Wang Chong and the others didn't have to wait for long. A few moments later the Arabs replied. A golden arrow was nailed to the walls, the quivering tail of the arrow carrying the Arabs' reply. The Arabs had agreed to the request of the Tang dynasty, but only for 6 hours. If the gates were not opened in 6 hours, the Arabs would immediately attack. On the walls, The Arabs maintained their composure upon receiving the Arabs' reply, but they were inwardly bursting into laughter. Write another letter to the Arabs. Tell them that a portion of the rebel army is intensely opposed and is already preparing for a mutiny. 6 hours is not enough. We need even more time. Wang Chong stood with his hands behind his back as he spoke once more. Bang! With Wang Chong's order, another arrow carrying the letter from the Tang dynasty shot into the Arab ranks. Upon receiving the letter from the Tang dynasty, the three titans of Black Radiance and Healer had strange expressions on their faces. They had originally been anticipating a fierce battle, but the development of the situation had taken them by surprise. In normal circumstances, the Arabs wouldn't even need to think about it. They would just charge into Khorasan and kill all the Tang people. But everyone knew that Khorasan's walls were high and thick, and there were 200,000 rebel soldiers within. This was no small number, and even in normal circumstances, the Arabs would have to pay a heavy price for victory. Chapter 1194. What do we do? It was Healer's turn to ask a question, his expression extremely unsightly. Let them do as they please. Isn't it just 8 hours? I'd like to see what tricks they have up their sleeves. The moment Faraz of Black Radiance spoke, the three titans of Black Radiance seemed to reach an agreement and left behind this order. The three quickly turned their horses around and rode into the depths of the army. As for the Tang dynasty, they exploded with cheers and laughter upon hearing the Arabs' news. 8 hours was equivalent to half a day. With just a few words, they had completely toyed with the Arabs. Let's go back and rest. Great General Bahram, I'll leave the matters on the walls to you. Although the Arabs have promised to attack the city in 8 hours, we can't completely trust them. Protector General Gao, and I will come to your aid at any time. Wang Chong turned to Bahram. After fighting alongside Bahram, he had gradually gained an understanding of this Sassanid great general. His style of battle was upright and dignified, steady, and almost impenetrable. With him standing guard on the walls, even if something went wrong, Bahram would be able to buy them enough time. Relax. Leave this matter to me. Bahram's eyes were bright as he patted his chest. Wang Chong nodded and turned to Li Sai. Li Sai, you stay as well. Work with Bahram in the defense. Yes, my lord. After descending from the walls, Wang Chong quickly entered the Lord's Hall of Khorasan, accompanied by Zhang Shoji, the King Gonka, and Banahan. Venerable Senior Zhang, have you prepared everything I ordered you to do? Wang Chong sat down in the hall and solemnly said, replying to Marquis, according to your Excellency's orders, we began preparing 7 or 8 days ago. Everything is in place. There will be no slip-ups. Zhang Shoji bowed his head and said respectfully, my lord, our side is also ready, but forgive me for speaking out of turn. Could it really be as my lord said? Banahan asked doubtfully. When he first received Wang Chong's order, he had asked about it, but Banahan felt that it was too unimaginable. It's fine if that's not the case, but if it really is as I imagine, then it won't just be the Arabs but us as well. Wang Chong's gaze was like lightning as it slowly swept past them, and his expression was incomparably solemn. Although he had always looked relaxed in front of everyone, as if victory was in his grasp, and he had a well-thought-out plan, only Wang Chong knew that this matter was not as simple as he had imagined, and it was possible that the entire army would be wiped out. Understood. Seeing the solemn expression on Wang Chong's face, everyone replied in unison. Let's check it again. Wang Chong said, yes, my lord. Time slowly passed, and the Arab army was getting closer and closer. It was only 10-some paces from the surging Tigris River, its 700,000 soldiers exuding a formidable pressure. But just as they had agreed, the Arabs did not rashly attack, instead waiting for the Tang dynasty to open the gates and surrender. In the blink of an eye, noon had passed, and everyone was waiting for Wang Chong's answer. Bang! An arrow quickly flew down from the walls of Khorasan and landed in front of them. My lord, the Tang people have sent another letter, saying that the rebel army in the city is getting more and more opposed. Although a large number of rebel soldiers have agreed, They will need another 2 hours to convince the rest. The messenger took the arrow and quickly ran into the tent at the back. What? Upon hearing the news, the Empire's white corpse healer stood up in anger. In the tent, the 3 titans of black radiance were motionless, but they were also frowning. What's going on? It's already been 8 hours. Are they still trying to fool us? The Empire's white corpse healer roared. My lord, but we already gave them 8 hours. If Karasin really is as they say, wouldn't all our efforts have been for naught? At this moment, one of the generals said. Healer froze, momentarily at a loss for words. This time, there are a lot of rebels. Each of them has their own ideas. The Tang people have just arrived. Even if they want to surrender, it will be difficult to get their consent. At this moment, another general spoke. Healer's eyes widened, and he was rendered speechless. He could feel that he was completely toyed with by the young commander of the Tang dynasty. It was a very bad feeling. Pass down my order. Give them another 2 hours. The 3 titans of black radiance finally made up their minds. However, this feeling was very uncomfortable. The 3 of them were now regretting their previous proposal. Flap flap. A messenger bird soared into the sky and quickly flew into Karasin. But 2 hours later, the Tang dynasty sent another message. The rebels still had not reached an agreement and needed more time, but it wasn't long before they could reach an agreement. They hoped that the Arabs would patiently wait for news. Bastard! A steely fist smashed into the tough Arabian steel, leaving a massive dent in it. Healer was naturally seething with anger, especially the 3 titans of black radiance, who were sitting motionlessly in the tent, their brows twitching. 12 hours had passed since the negotiations had begun, and now that they thought about it, it was truly absurd. Moreover, as time went on, even the 3 titans of black radiance began to feel that the Tang people were intentionally stalling for time. But even so, the 4 of them were still unable to completely confirm the Tang people's intentions. 2 hours. We'll give them 2 more hours at most. If they don't surrender by then, no matter what reason they give, we'll immediately attack. Fadi, the head of Dark Radiance, finally made up his mind. Every game had an end, and 14 hours was the limit that the 3 titans of black radiance could endure. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before nightfall. At that time, even if the Arabs wanted to attack, they would be powerless. Flap flap. As the 3 titans of black radiance made their final decision, a second Arabian hunting falcon soared into the sky and vanished from Karasin. A storm was brewing, and even though neither the Tang dynasty nor the Arabs had moved, the atmosphere was more tense than ever. Both sides had gathered their armies, and everyone knew that the moment the battle began, it would be earth-shattering and corpses strewn across the land. As time passed, the sky gradually darkened. While both parties exchanged letters, it was already nearing dusk. Flap flap. Finally, a messenger bird soared into the sky from Karasin and landed in the Arab camp. This time, the Arabs finally received the final reply from the Tang dynasty. After repeated and difficult discussions, the Tang dynasty, Karasin, and the rebel armies had finally reached an answer that suited all sides. No surrender. Bastard. The 3 titans of black radiance, Healer, and all the Arab generals were thoroughly enraged by this letter. Pass on my order. Immediately begin the attack. Once the city is breached, kill all the Tang people in Khorasani. As long as they can still breathe, leave no one alive. The order of the 3 titans of black radiance was swiftly transmitted to the army. Rumble, the originally calm ground suddenly trembled violently. As the 700,000 soldiers began to advance toward Karasin, their enormous momentum caused the entire Tigris River to tremble and lose its calm. Kail! Kail! Amidst heaven-shaking fighting cries, countless small boats, tens of thousands of them, were pushed out of the Arab army and plunged into the Tigris River. Soon after, countless war horses entered the boats, all of them rushing toward Karasin like a school of carp in a river. Careful! A shrill cry resounded through the heavens, followed by the rumbling of war drums as countless soldiers scaled the walls of Karasin. At the same time, several thousand ballistae lined up on the walls of Karasin, their sharp tips aimed at the small boats, and the Arab cavalry on the Tigris River several dozen zhang away. The Arabs had clearly made ample preparations for this battle. Each boat was manned by an extremely skilled soldier, and these soldiers continued to row the boats with astonishing speed. 20 zhang, 100 zhang, 50 zhang. The Arabs were getting closer and closer to the shore. Finally, release. On the walls, Chunbin swung his sword. The first to attack was not the several thousand Tang dynasty ballistae, but the beehives that had been dismantled from the steel walls. Boom, boom, boom. A series of thunderous booms rang out from the city walls. In the next moment, a dense rain of arrows covered the sky like dark clouds, completely obscuring the sky above the Tigris River. Swish, swish, swish. A destructive wave of attacks was unleashed. Screams filled the air as countless Arab cavalry, caught off guard, were pierced through by the rain of arrows. Their bodies trembled for a moment before plummeting from their boats like wooden pillars. Plop, plop. In a single wave of attacks, tens of thousands of Arab cavalry were plunged into the icy and turbulent waters of the Tigris River. The clear waters were dyed red and began to spread. The Arab soldiers that had appeared here had all been transferred from other places and had never fought with the Tang dynasty before. They were completely unprepared for the Tang dynasty's methods of attack, resulting in severe losses. Ready. Chapter 1195. Release. With another order, tens of thousands of arrows rained down, engulfing the Arabs on the Tigris River. Bang, bang, bang. This time, the beehives were no longer targeting the Arabs on the boats, but the wooden boats crossing the Tigris River. Careful. Protect the boats. The Arabs had reacted very quickly, but wooden boats were not soldiers. They were too densely packed and not easy to defend. Bang, bang, bang. With a series of crisp sounds, a wooden boat was riddled with holes. The rain of arrows had holes that looked like honeycombs, and it quickly sank into the rapidly flowing Tigris River. One boat, two boats, three. One boat after another was quickly sunk into the river. The Arabs had made many preparations, all the boats being covered in metal to strengthen their defenses, but the powerful beehives that the Tang dynasty had installed on the walls were still no match for them. No matter the price, all soldiers charge. The three titans of black radiance quickly appeared on the Tigris River as three enormous storms of energy approached. They raised their heads, their gazes sweeping over the walls toward Wang Chong, Gao Xinji and Bahram. In their correspondence, Wang Chong's group had completely toyed with them, causing the three titans of black radiance to burn with rage. They wanted nothing more than to immediately kill Wang Chong's group. In the entire Arabian Empire, no one had ever dared to humiliate them like this. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the Tang, Khorasani, and rebel soldiers on the other side of the river watched as more than 10,000 wooden boats emerged from the rear of the Arab army and were tossed into the Tigris River. In just a few moments, the Tigris River was once more covered in wooden boats. Charge. With this order, the 100 vying boats once more shot toward the majestic walls of Khorasan. Chui Piaochi Li Sai Banahan King Gonka, get ready, Wang Chong said without turning his head as he stared at the Arabs charging at him. Yes, this general obeys. Behind him, everyone responded in unison. They quickly turned around and headed down the city wall. Qianli, Yuanqing, Shi, the three of you should go as well. Gao Xinji looked at the opposite side and ordered. Eben, you go. Bahram spoke at almost the same time. This general obeys. Behind Bahram, an early-level imperial great general bowed and began to descend the walls. The ships were getting closer and closer. People were constantly shot through by the rain of arrows, and there were also ships constantly falling into the water and sinking into the Tigris River. Along with their horses, they were overturned by the huge waves and washed downstream. Even though the Arabs had suffered grievous losses, with tens of thousands of soldiers dying in the Tigris River in just a few rounds of attacks, the Arabs had not been able to resist. "50,000, 100,000, 150,000. When the number of soldiers on the eastern shore reached 200,000, Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light, and he immediately swung down an arm. Attack! With Wang Chong's order, the dense beehives on the walls began to attack, a torrent of arrows howling through the air. At almost the same time, the several thousand Tang ballistas suddenly changed directions. Instead of aiming at the Arab soldiers below the walls, they began to tilt, following the taut ropes, as they aimed at the Arab soldiers climbing up the walls. Buzz! The Arab soldiers at the very front were in the midst of accelerating their charge, when they suddenly saw a flashing arrowhead in front of them, and a massive ballista in the rear. Their eyes went wide, and their pupils constricted as an unprecedented sense of danger swept through their bodies. Not good. Jump! The Arab soldier at the very front immediately released his arm in fear, and prepared to jump down. But before he could do so, boom! A massive ballista bolt shot out of the ballista like a dragon emerging from the sea, piercing through his shoulder, and sending him flying backward. Swish swish swish! Ballista bolts flew through the air and blood splashed through the air. The Arab soldiers climbing up the ropes were like skewered grasshoppers, pierced by the sharp ballista bolts one after another. The sound of arrows piercing through flesh and bone was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Thud thud thud. A few moments later, 20-some Arab soldiers were pierced through by ballista bolts and dropped from the ropes. At almost the same time, the enormous ropes began to shudder and groan as tens of thousands of Arab soldiers began to drop to the ground. Su Hanshan's ballista army had shocked the world with a single volley. In this volley, they had killed 15,000 Arab soldiers. Ever since the Battle of Talas had ended, and all the ballista bolts had been used up, Su Hanshan had begun to strictly control the use of ballista bolts. Until a new batch of ballista bolts arrived, the tens of thousands of ballista bolts that Zhang Shouji had repaired were their only remaining reserves. And for the Tang dynasty, the ballista bolts and beehives were only the beginning. A moment later, rumble! As the Arabs looked on in shock, the massive and sturdy gates of Khorasan opened with a boom. The Arabs had predicted that this would have been the most difficult part, but it had been accomplished so easily. And then something even more shocking occurred. Kill! War cries shook the heavens as tens of thousands of Tang, Khorasani, and rebel soldiers charged out of the open gate, their eyes wide with rage and killing intent seething from their bodies. Careful! Get into formation! At this sight, the Arab soldiers on the eastern shore fell into panic. In terms of soldiers, the Arabs had the absolute advantage. 600 to 700,000 soldiers were more than enough to crush the mob in the city. No one had expected that the Tang dynasty would dare to attack, even though they had the advantage in numbers. Damn it! On the other side of the river, the three titans of black radiance grimaced. Pass on my order. All soldiers hurry up and cross the river. We can't give them a single chance. Yes. 10-some messengers scattered and began to issue orders in various directions. But it was too late. The surging tributary of the Tigris River had become a shackle around the neck of the Arab army. The Arabs had hundreds of thousands of soldiers, but the soldiers on the west bank and the warships on the tributaries of the Tigris River were completely useless. Only the 200,000 soldiers on the east bank were truly fighting the Great Tang. In terms of numbers, the Arabs on the eastern bank had no advantage. Attack halfway across the river. Chapter 1196. From the moment he saw the tributary of the Tigris River, Wang Chong knew that this city would be even more difficult to take than he had imagined. In Wang Chong's hands, this city was even more powerful than the Arabs. It was even tougher and more difficult to take. On the battlefield of Talas, Wang Chong still needed to establish two steel defense lines to separate the Uzan, Western Turks and Arabs, but there was no need for that here. A single river was enough for Wang Chong to complete his strategy. This was what the art of war referred to as attacking halfway across the river. Bum bum bum. The air boomed as the Wuxian cavalry and Aswaran cataphracts charged through the open gates, sweeping through the Arabs. Swords and scimitars slashed down, throwing the Arabs into disarray. Some were thrown into the air by their horses, some were cut down by their blades, and some were killed or wounded. The formation of the hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers was thrown into chaos. With the Wuxian cavalry and Aswaran cataphracts leading the charge, The Khorasani and rebel soldiers followed closely behind, charging at the Arabs on the eastern bank of the Tigris River like a massive wave. And this was not the end. On the high walls, Wang Chong stomped down, unleashing two powerful war halos that spread out in all directions, illuminating the entire battlefield and bolstering the feet of every Arab soldier. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Clang Clang Clang. With a metallic clatter, the war halos of at least half of the Arabs began to flicker like candles in the wind. And in just a few moments, they began to fall off. The bane of the battlefield halo, the bane of generals halo. After unleashing these two war halos, Wang Chong immediately stomped down and fired off a third. This time, however, the target was the Wuxian cavalry instead of the Arabs. The halo of Dusk Stallion. When Wang Chong imbued the three halos of Dusk Stallion on the Wuxian cavalry, the several thousand Wuxian cavalry were like tigers that had grown wings. Their speed, strength, and dexterity were greatly boosted, and their strength soared. Rumble. The Arabs had already been finding it very difficult to resist, and now they were even more routed. Ah! A stalwart Arab horseman bellowed as he was struck by a Wuxian horseman. Both he and his horse were thrown 10-some meters into the air. Their chests caved in, and their organs shattered. In all directions, there were countless people who were sent flying into the sky like this. Bastard! On the west bank of the Tigris River, the three titans of Black Radiance were utterly infuriated by the sight of the Tang, Khorasani and rebels surging out of the city, their corpses piling up into mountains, and their blood flowing into rivers. Governor, hear my order. Immediately move out and kill those Khorasani survivors and Eastern infidels. Before he finished speaking, a gale surged, and the giant black capes behind the three Black Radiants suddenly unfurled. The three of them rose into the air almost at the same time. Boom! Amidst the intense neighing of horses, the air suddenly caved in, and 6 deep hoofprints appeared uniformly. The formless, and impenetrable air was like solid ground beneath the feet of the three titans of Black Radiance. Not only that, but the moment the three of them stepped out, the 12 powerful hooves of the three black armored warhorses simultaneously ignited a raging black flame, making the three of them look like devil gods from the end of the world. Clang! A black war halo shot out like frost. The head of Obsidian grabbed the reins, and was the first to leap out, heading for the wall on the opposite side. Behind him, the others flew out at the same time. Haha, it's time to move out. Wang Chong chuckled, his hair flying in the wind. Before anyone else could do anything, bang! His body leaped off the walls of Khorassan, and as soon as he touched the ground, he began to accelerate toward the three titans of Black Radiance. Great Yin-Yang Heaven Creation Art. Wang Chong was as fast as a bolt of lightning, and as he shot forward, the air around his shoulders rumbled as the illusions of 2 suns and moons appeared. A moment later, the air began to howl, with Wang Chong at the center of the battlefield. Even the horses of the three titans of Black Radiance were affected, their bodies swaying, and on the verge of falling out of the sky. Directly below Wang Chong, the blood of the Arab horsemen was being sucked out of their bodies, transforming into a bloody mist that surged toward Wang Chong's body. Damn it! The three titans of Black Radiance couldn't help but grimace at this sight. Boom! A black spear as thick as a child's arm smashed down, unleashing an invisible wave of energy that surged in every direction, clashing with Wang Chong's terrifying suction force. Careful! The moment the head of Black Radiance froze the air, a frantic shout came from his side. The head of Black Radiance raised his head, and was immediately alarmed by what he saw. In a nearby flash of light, the young commander of the Tang dynasty had recovered. What shocked the head of Black Radiance the most was that there were 3 identical versions of Wang Chong. Even someone of Fadi's cultivation level was unable to tell which one was real, and which one was fake. This is impossible. Just what sort of technique is this? The head of Black Radiance's Fadi's brows rose in shock. Illusion techniques were not particularly high-level techniques, but illusions that could fool an imperial great general were extremely rare. In all his years of campaigning, Fadi had never encountered such a situation. Kill him. After their initial shock, the three titans quickly calmed down, Hong, the three big shots gripped their spears and attacked at the same time. Three enormous destructive forces suddenly burst forth from their bodies and fiercely pierced into the air. At that moment, space itself seemed to be torn apart. Bang bang! Two of Wang Chang's clones popped like bubbles. At this moment, an earth-shattering noise was heard. Great destruction art. Black radiance corrosion. In the blink of an eye, the two massive destructive golden torrents collided heavily in the void. Boom! In a flash of light, the head of black radiance. Fadi bellowed as he and his horse were thrown several dozen zhang by Wang Chong, from the eastern shore of the Tigris River to the western shore. Boom! An invisible wave of energy exploded as Fadi's horse stomped on the ground, neighing and swaying several times before finally stabilizing itself. Half the battlefield was deathly still, and on the western shore of the Tigris River, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers were so shocked that they couldn't speak. The empire's white corpse, Healer, was a powerful and illustrious governor of the empire, and the three titans of black radiance had far surpassed him in fame, prestige, and strength. Not even governor of the East Abu Muslim could compare. No one had expected that Fadi would be thrown several dozen zhang away by a single blow from Wang Chong. In terms of strength, he had been completely suppressed by this youth of the Tang people. This wave of Arab commanders truly is much more formidable. In the air, Wang Chong stretched his arms and legs, but he did not pursue. Ever since he had broken into the great general level, his strength had skyrocketed. There were very few experts that could compare to him, much less defeat him. Not even the three titans of black radiance were a match for him, but they were still top-class governors of the Arabian Empire. Even Wang Chong would find it very difficult to kill them in a short time. Bastard! Let's kill him together. The moment Wang Chong stepped into the air rumbled as he sensed extreme danger from behind him. At almost the same time, the other two titans of black radiance and blade of black radiance gripped their spears and charged at him from two completely different directions. Ha ha ha, you want to bully me with numbers? Chonger, let me help you. Right at this moment, a loud and clear voice suddenly resounded above their heads. Before the voice faded away, an enormous and unstoppable aura wrapped in tens of thousands of airflows poured down from the sky. Who is this? Careful! Feeling this terrifying aura, Imran and Farrell were both horrified. The young commander that had appeared before them was already very powerful, but the martial artist above them was actually even more powerful than him. With no time to think, the two of them mustered all their strength and shot upward. Rumble! In an instant, there was an earth-shattering explosion as the three destructive forces collided heavily in the air. But before the first wave had even subsided, Wang Chong unleashed a palm that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Boom! 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 In a flash, the air exploded, sending shockwaves several hundred zhang high into the air. The thousands of Arab cavalry on the ground didn't even have time to scream before they were pulverized. Amidst the destructive airwaves, two figures flew out like cannonballs. Damn it! In midair, Imran and Faraz burst out two war halos in succession and managed to stabilize themselves with great difficulty, but both of their faces had become extremely pale. Although the two of them had managed to resist the combined attacks of Wang Chong and the evil emperor in that fierce clash, their internal organs had suffered significant damage. These bastards! It seems like the information was correct. Several extremely formidable experts truly did come to Khorasan this time. No wonder someone as powerful as Qutayba died to them. But no matter how powerful they are, they won't be able to escape unscathed. Everyone hear my order. Attack. The voices of the three titans of black radiance echoed over the Tigris River, and then the three of them once more charged forward. Behind them, one Arab governor after another flew over the Tigris River and toward Wang Chong's group. 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 Arab governors and many generals were charging toward Khorasan. Chapter 1197. Wang Chong, I've come to help you. In a fierce gale, a figure descended from the walls like a large bird. Chief Wuxiang, wielding his cane, was extremely conspicuous. After the Battle of Talas, with the help of Wang Chong and the other generals, the old village chief, and the evil emperor, had both recovered from the battle and regained their former strength. 8 Ultimate Sunderings Art. At almost the same time, Gao Xianji unsheathed his sword and flew down from the walls. Ocean Ring. A loud roar resounded through the heavens, accompanied by the roar of the tide. Cheng Qianli also jumped down from the walls, the ocean ring in his hand. Earlier, Wang Chong had killed Ziad and obtained the ocean ring. In the end, after everyone had tested it, they had realized that Cheng Qianli was most compatible with the ocean ring, so they had left it for him to use. Although Cheng Qianli no longer had the supreme desolation god, he had the ocean ring, allowing him to rise to the ranks of great generals. Bahram, Ebni, and the other rebel leaders charged down from the walls in the face of the onslaught of Arab governors, brigadier generals, and other generals. Not long after this battle had begun, it had become a top-class battle between great generals. The sky above the battlefield on the east bank of the Tigris River quickly became dangerous. Airwaves were like ocean waves, crashing, colliding, and roaring in the void. All kinds of martial arts and weapons flashed in the void. The various forces cooperated with each other and attacked together. The two sides were locked in a stalemate. Nay! Suddenly, a fierce screech came from below. An Arab governor glanced down and instantly grimaced. "My lords, it's bad. Our army can't hold on for much longer." Beneath the majestic walls of Khorasan, countless people of the Tang dynasty, Khorasani, and rebel armies were charging through the Arab soldiers, killing their way along the walls and the edges of the battlefield. While the 3 titans of Black Radiance, Hewler, and the other Arab governors were engaged in fierce battle with Wang Chong's forces, the Tang dynasty, Khorasan, and the rebel army of the various regions, under the leadership of Cui Piaoqi, Li Sai, and the King Gonka, had completed the encirclement of the 200,000 Arab soldiers, and was beginning to encircle them. In the rear, soldiers were still pouring out of the open gates of Khorasan. If this continued, the battle between the 3 titans of Black Radiance, Hewler, and Wang Chong would not even be over before the 200,000 Arab soldiers on the eastern shore were completely wiped out. "Retreat! All troops retreat!" The 3 titans of Black Radiance looked down at this sight, their pupils constricting and their faces paling. The Tigris River on the western side of Khorasan had become the Arab army's fatal weakness. In normal circumstances, the Tang dynasty would never try to outflank the Arabs, while they still had 500,000 soldiers on the other side of the river. But the Tigris River made it extremely difficult for the Arabs to send reinforcements. Thus, even the 500,000 soldiers on the western shore were powerless to do anything. You only thought of this now? Cui Piaoqi Li Sai King Gonka, hear my order. All soldiers, pull back and exterminate the Arabs." Wang Chong, standing in the air, could clearly hear these words. Keeping one's eyes and ears open to all directions was an essential quality for a general. While Wang Chong was battling with the 3 titans of Black Radiance, he had already taken care of everything. By the time the Arabs noticed, Wang Chong had already finished his preparations, encircling all the Arab soldiers on the eastern shore of the Tigris River. Bum bum bum. With Wang Chong's order, the Tang dynasty, Khorasan, and other rebel armies instantly tightened into a fishing net and began to charge at the Arabs from every direction. Bang bang bang. In just a few moments, groups of Arab cavalry were cut down like weeds. No matter how they struggled, they were unable to resist. 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 70,000. The rate at which the Arabs were being routed was much faster than expected. One side had come prepared and was attacking in an orderly fashion, while the other side was in a state of panic, not even knowing where the attacks were coming from. Defeat was like a landslide. In the highest level battles in the sky, the Arabs could still hold their own against the Tang, even holding a slight advantage, but on the ground, it was a completely different matter. Kill the soldiers they've surrounded, and open a path of retreat for the main army. Hong Long. A wave of black energy descended from the sky like a meteor, crashing heavily into the midst of a rebel army. In an instant, explosions filled the sky as countless Revolutionary Army soldiers were blasted into pieces, and sent flying into the sky. The head of Black Radiance, Fadi, was the first to descend to the ground. At the same time, Hewler and the other Arab governors descended to help attack the Tang dynasty army by the Tigris River. With the cooperation of these governors, the Arabs quickly opened a path to the western shore, and the soldiers scrambled to board the warships and retreat to the western shore. Go! Let's go! An Arab horseman had a panicked expression on his face as he stepped onto a small warship and began to flee in panic toward the western shore of the Tigris River. Behind them, more and more Arab soldiers were surging through the gap to the west. Retreat! Retreat at full speed! The Arab army was in chaos. Fars Gamadan, lead your armies to cover the rear. Don't let the Tang people charge over. The Empire's white corpse, Hewler, suddenly landed on the ground and ordered two nearby Arab governors, wrapped in heavy black armor. But before Hewler could finish speaking, boom! In the rear of the army, a massive dragon banner suddenly appeared in the open gate of Khorasan, and beneath it, a muscular figure like a mountain strode out of the gate. Behind him, metal clattered as one army after another surged forward with unstoppable momentum toward the Arab army. The Divine Martial Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Divine Prison Army, the Azure Martial Army, the Tongluo Cavalry. These top-class armies of the Tang dynasty entered the battlefield. Clang! There was a flash of cold light, and before an Arab horseman could react, he was cleaved in two along with his horse by a Divine Martial Army soldier. Boom boom. 1, 2, 3. As the Tang dynasty mobilized its top-class armies, wave after wave of Arab soldiers were felled. These Tang soldiers were like sharp swords that reaped the lives of the Arab cavalry. Countless horsemen charged forward, but they were like ants trying to shake a tree against the sharpness of top-class armies like the Divine Martial Army and Divine Prison Army. The moment they charged forward, they were cut down and dropped to the ground. 5,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000. Although the Divine Prison Army, Divine Martial Army, and Dragon Stallion Army were dismounted, they were able to advance faster than all the cavalry. Aya! Screams filled the air. This was the first time the armies of the interior of the Arabian Empire had experienced the power of the top-class armies of the Tang dynasty. The pressure and momentum they exerted were unimaginable. The Arab army had already been at an absolute disadvantage, and now that the Black Armored Guard had led the Divine Martial Army, Divine Prison Army, and other elite armies into the fray, the Arabs were in an even worse predicament. They were truly on the verge of a landslide, with no hope of recovery. Everyone retreat at full speed. Hewler clenched his teeth at this sight. In the end, he had no choice but to give up on any hope and order his army to retreat at full speed. Boom! A horn blared from the camp on the other side of the river. This time, it was a true retreat. The moment the horn blared, the Tang dynasty's Khorasani and the rebel armies began to roar as they accelerated their encirclement. Thump thump thump. One pale-faced corpse after another dropped to the ground. In just a few moments, 110,000 of the 200,000 soldiers that had reached the eastern shore of the Tigris River had been killed. Moreover, the vast sea of Tang dynasty soldiers, Khorasani and rebel armies continued to push forward. The space was getting smaller and smaller, and not even the warships were able to ferry all the Arabs and cavalry. Finally, splash! Splash! In a panic, the Arab cavalry and their horses hurriedly plunged into the icy and turbulent Tigris River. They were swept downstream by the current. Behind him, 2, 3, 4 tens of thousands of Arab cavalry, driven into the river by the Tang army, jumped into the river. Jumping into the river only had a certain chance of death, and the chances of survival were rather high. But if they were pursued by the Tang people in Khorasani, they would be doomed. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 more and more soldiers jumped into the river and swam to the other shore, but even more were fleeing. In just a few moments, all the Arab soldiers on the eastern shore had either jumped into the river or boarded warships and retreated to the other shore. At the same time, the three titans of Black Radiance, Hewler, and all the Arab governors and generals soared into the air, either on the surface of the river or through the air. All of them headed for the opposite shore. Let's stop here. When they were still some distance from the river, Wang Chong waved his hand to stop them. The Tigris River was a double-edged sword. It could be used to deal with the Arabs, but it could also be used to restrain the Tang dynasty. Fortunately, in the heart of the Arabian Empire, the Tang dynasty had the initiative. The ones who truly needed to break this stalemate were the Arabs, not the Tang dynasty. Retreat. Chapter 1198. My lord, what do we do? On the other side of the Tigris River, countless Arab soldiers emerged from the icy waters in fright. On the shore, Healer unwillingly turned to the head of Black Radiance, Fadi. It's too late, Fadi gloomily said. He raised his head and looked up. The sky was dark and gloomy, with only a faint light shining through. Unknowingly, it was already night time. In these circumstances, no matter how unwilling Fadi was, he could only give up and wait for tomorrow to fight. Has the army led by Jalil still not arrived? Fadi turned to look at a general behind him. My lord, Lord Jalil is already traveling at full speed, but the weather is cold and the steel bridges are too heavy. As a result, the journey has been somewhat delayed and will probably only arrive tomorrow morning. The Arab general lowered his head and bowed. A hint of anger flickered through Fadi's eyes at these words. For this siege, the Arabs had mobilized almost all of their forces, and they had made far more preparations than many people had imagined. In their original strategy, the Arabs had prepared a large number of steel bridges to cross the river. But Fadi believed that they already had a large number of warships, so there was no need to wait for these bulky steel bridges. Fadi had never imagined that his decision would cause his army to pay such a grievous price. Send an order to Galil, tell him to march quickly. I must see those steel bridges crossing the river by daybreak tomorrow, Fadi said without turning his head. This general will go. The general behind him bowed and said, in addition, Healer, write a letter for me to His Majesty the Caliph. Tell him that our top-class soldiers are far from enough. I hope that His Majesty can dispatch even more great generals to exterminate the Tang people. In addition, if possible, I request that His Majesty send Governor Ansari to assist the soldiers of Khorasan. Fadi said. Buzz. Healer's body trembled at the mention of Ansari's name, his eyes going wide. In the Arabian Empire, Ansari's name was like the noon sun, and he was probably not much inferior to Qutayba. In Arabia, Ansari and Qutayba had been known as the twin heroes of Arabia, but in the struggle for the position of war god, Ansari had lost to Qutayba. In a moment of rage, he had withdrawn from the army. Qutayba had spent all these years leading his army into battle, immersing himself in the joy of conquest. As for Ansari, in order to defeat Qutayba and wash away his shame, he had been cultivating in seclusion. After so many years of suffering, there were rumors in the outside world that Ansari's strength had already surpassed Qutayba's. Some people had once seen Ansari, but a single glance was enough to make them shiver in fear and lose the will to fight. An ordinary rumor would have been ignored, but the speaker was an Arab governor. When this news spread, it sent shockwaves through all of Arabia. However, Ansari had a cruel personality that was even worse than Qutayba's, and he would even attack his allies at times. Almost no one in the empire wanted to have too much of a relationship with Ansari. That's right. There's also the governor of death of the southern war zone, Adil. Transfer him over as well. We don't need any other soldiers. We only need them, the blood of Black Filas suddenly said. But my lord, Lord Adil is currently dealing with the Wadler people in the south and the peasant rebels. He has no time to spare, Healer said, his voice tinged with hesitation. Although Arabia was extremely powerful, it also had many enemies that they needed to defend. The more countries they conquered, the more resistance they would encounter. This was also why Arabia could not mobilize all its governors at once. Although the enemies around Arabia were not as powerful as the Tang dynasty, there were many more weak and resisting factions. This was also why Arabia had been forced to station many soldiers in various places. Although Adil was powerful, his position was extremely important and could not be easily mobilized. It won't be too much of a problem if he's only gone for around 10 days. In addition, Could the tribes in the south be stronger than the 200,000 soldiers in Khorasan? Philas sternly said. This. Keeler lowered his head in silence. The threat from the east this time was far greater than any of the factions on Arabia's border, perhaps even greater than all of them combined. In addition, although the Tang dynasty only had 200,000 soldiers in total, which was not a large number, everyone had witnessed the strength they had displayed. Before the battle had even begun, Arabia had already lost 200,000 soldiers. This was something that no other faction on Arabia's border could accomplish. Understood. I'll do it right away, Keeler sternly said. The three titans of Black Radiance reported the names of 10 some Arab governors, and Keeler recorded them all. A few moments later, an Arabian hunting falcon took to the air and flew off in the direction of Baghdad. Keeler, pass on my order. When all the steel bridges arrive tomorrow, immediately cross the river and launch an all-out assault. Kill all the Tang people and Khorasani in the city. Leave no one alive. Yes. As the night darkened and the Arabs retreated, Khorasan fell into a state of tranquility. The weather was getting colder and colder, and no one noticed that a thin layer of frost was slowly forming along the steep walls of Khorasan. The weather was even colder than it had been in the early morning. At this moment, Khorasan was ablaze with lanterns. The battle for the day had ended, and the Tang dynasty had made a small sacrifice in exchange for a massive victory. But it was still far from over. Lord Protector General, what should we do next? Although the Arabs have already retreated, these losses are far from enough to deal them a serious blow. Shi Yuanqing turned to Wang Chong, his expression somewhat grave, as he spoke from a corner of the hall. Moreover, based on the Arabs' usual style of battle, they've suffered in the battle of the day. I'm afraid that they'll be even more prepared in the next wave of attacks, and their attacks will be even fiercer. Not only that, I'm worried that they'll summon even more experts and soldiers. After all, this place is too close to Baghdad. Cheng Qianli also spoke, his expression extremely grim. This was not the first time they had clashed with the Arabs. In the Battle of Talas, they had believed that they had pushed back the Arabs, but in the end, the Arabs had received an endless stream of reinforcements. Every time they pushed back one wave, another would come, and each wave was getting stronger and stronger. Not only that, in this wave, even more rebel soldiers should have come to Khorasan to reinforce us. But I've received news that all the rebel soldiers on the Arabs' border have been severely suppressed. I sense that the Arabs are thinking of ways to mobilize even more border soldiers to deal with us. To the Arabs and the Caliph, we've already become a serious problem. Bahram's voice was heavy. It's simply impossible for us to fight against all of Arabia with just 200,000 soldiers. This is impossible. General, without the reinforcements of the Tang dynasty, we will not be able to contend against them. General, do you really think that we can stop this wave? With these last words, Bahram looked worriedly at Wang Chong. The Tang dynasty was too far from Khorasan, and Wang Chong had long ago told him that the Tang dynasty's reinforcements would never arrive, at least not so quickly. But Wang Chong had revealed on more than one occasion that they could stop the Arab assault, and he was extremely confident that they had a plan in mind and something to rely on. But Bahram truly couldn't understand what Wang Chong was relying on. He had originally believed that Wang Chong was trying to keep it a secret, but he hadn't expected that not even Gao Xianji or Cheng Qianli would know. Buzz! Bahram's words instantly caused everyone in the hall to focus on Wang Chong. Even the usually reticent black armored guard looked over. All of them were looking at Wang Chong, trust and expectation on their faces. At this point in the battle, Wang Chong had become the pillar of support for everyone. Even Gao Xianji, an experienced Anqi protector general, had unwittingly begun to place a great deal of trust in Wang Chong. Haha, I've already taken care of everything. Before daybreak tomorrow, everything will be clear. Wang Chong faintly smiled. Everyone in the room was stunned by Wang Chong's words. With so many Arab soldiers outside the city, and so many imperial great generals, it was already quite difficult for them to hold off this wave. For Wang Chong to say that they could finish off the Arab army before daybreak was simply unbelievable. Anyone else would have taken them to be a madman, but since it was Wang Chong, no matter how crazy he was, they believed that Wang Chong was serious. The meeting quickly came to an end. Out of their trust in Wang Chong, and the knowledge that he had already made arrangements, no one asked any more questions. Time slowly passed, and the temperature grew colder and colder. Even though the two sides had stopped fighting, the Tigris River was still a matter of tension both inside and outside the city. To the southeast of Khorasan, Wang Chong was seated cross-legged in a lavishly decorated hall with a dome-shaped roof. A single candle was lit, and in the dim light, Wang Chong sat cross-legged. It was late at night, and all was quiet inside and outside of Khorasan. Other than the rushing of the Tigris River and the neighing of Ney's horse, there was nothing else. Time slowly passed. Although he couldn't see anything, Wang Chong could sense that everyone in the city was silently watching and waiting for him. But few people knew that Wang Chong was also waiting for that matter to arrive. Thump, thump, thump. As he was thinking, someone knocked on his door. Enter. Chapter 1199. The door to the room opened, and the gray-robed Zhang Shouji walked in. Marquis, it's the appointed time. Pass on the order. Proceed according to the plan. After a few moments of silence, Wang Chong nodded. Regardless of whether or not that event would occur, Wang Chong had to make complete preparations. Moreover, it was already close to the Z period. If that event really did occur, and he did not make sufficient preparations, he might be caught off guard. Understood. This old man will go and make the arrangements. Zhang Shouji nodded and quickly withdrew from Wang Chong's room. A few moments later, the tranquil city of Khorasan was abuzz with chatter and chatter. At this moment, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the Arab camp, separated only by a river, were silent. The night was so cold that even the sneezes of the warhorses were white. The weather was getting colder and colder, and this winter seemed to be much colder than the winters of the past. But to the Arab soldiers who cultivated in martial arts, it was still within the limits of endurance. Although the cold was heavy, the baleful aura of the hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers was even heavier. At the very front of the camp, all the Arab commanders had gathered, gazing at the majestic city of Khorasan. To the army, nothing was important other than capturing the city and killing the Tang people, Khorasani, and rebel soldiers. Bang! Suddenly, a hubbub erupted from Khorasan, immediately attracting everyone's attention. What's going on? At the very front, the head of Black Radiance, Fadi, raised his head and looked at Khorasan. My lord, are these Tang people planning to attack? An aide next to him said. Impossible. Before the aide could finish, a deep and resounding voice came from the side. The blood of Black Radiance, Faraz, shook his head and immediately rejected the idea. These Tang people and Khorasani soldiers are simply not enough to launch an attack on us. Moreover, once they do, the Tigris River will become a massive obstacle. Forcefully attacking is suicide. But what are they trying to do? The Empire's White Corps healer also said. The three of them stood side by side, their expressions constantly shifting. The activity in Khorasan was far too strange. Everyone could see that the city was brightly lit, but the gates of Khorasan were tightly shut, showing no signs of opening. Time passed slowly, and all the soldiers received their orders. They were all on standby, ready to deal with any possible emergencies. Other than being brighter and hotter, everything in Khorasan was the same as before. Even the raucous chatter rapidly faded away. What are these guys doing? An Arab general muttered to himself in the dense Arab camp, his words echoing the thoughts in everyone's mind. Even powerful governors like Fadi, Faraz, and Healer were confused. They couldn't figure out what the Tang people were up to. If the Tang people weren't going to attack, what was the point of making such a big commotion? Pass down my order. The army is to be on full alert. Everyone else is to rest. In addition, prepare to attack the city at daybreak. Fadi sternly said. His words were quickly spread throughout the army. Khorasan quickly calmed down. Wang Chong sat motionlessly in his room. Several hours had passed, but the event Wang Chong had been waiting for still had not occurred. Other than the fact that Khorasan had grown colder, There was nothing strange about it. At some point, it was the Z period, and Wang Chang's brow began to crease. Impossible. Did I make a mistake in my calculations? That thing won't happen. Wang Chang's expression was calm, but he was beginning to feel uneasy. If nothing unexpected had happened, the event he had been waiting for should have already occurred. But Wang Chong had still seen no signs of it. After being reborn twice, many things had changed and deviated greatly because of his own reasons. The king of Song had not been demoted, the southwest had not been lost, and not only had Talas not been lost, it had been won. Everything was completely different from his memories. Could it be that the matter had been completely changed because of his interference? Wang Chong's brow was creasing tighter and tighter. If that event disappeared because of him, then at daybreak, the Tang dynasty would have to face the hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers on the other side of the Tigris River, many governors and generals, and even more reinforcements. Just as Bahram had said, this was using the strength of a corner to contend against the entire empire. This would be an unprecedentedly fierce battle, and the chances of victory were minuscule. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong couldn't help but feel a little vexed and anxious. He almost subconsciously picked up the teacup on the table and prepared to take a sip, but the moment he brought the teacup to his lips, Wang Chong heard a cracking sound. This sound was almost inaudible, but it was like a peal of thunder in Wang Chong's ears. Wang Chong's eyes widened as he subconsciously lowered his head to look. A moment later, a shocking sight occurred. In the teacup, on the surface of the calm tea, a thin layer of ice was covering the entire surface at a speed visible to the naked eye. Furthermore, the frost was constantly spreading, rapidly deepening and thickening. Whoosh! A cold gust of wind blew in through the slightly ajar door. Wherever the cold wind blew, the walls of the room were visibly covered in a layer of white frost. Even the teacup in Wang Chong's hand was covered in a fine layer of ice. Ah! Cries of alarm came from outside the door, but they only lasted for a few moments before fading away. It's here. Wang Chong seemed to understand something. Turning his head, he strode to the door and opened it with a creak. Boom! At this moment, it was like he had gone from one world to another. A blizzard blew past, and Wang Chong's body was immediately covered in a thin layer of frost, including his hair and the tip of his nose. Outside the door, flames were blazing. Wang Chong had ordered Zhang Shouji, Banahan, and the other craftsmen to light many fires in Khorasan, and these furnaces were constantly spewing smoke into the sky. The heat exuded by these furnaces and bonfires combined to make the night of Khorasan less cold. But now, all these flames seemed to be suppressed by some invisible energy, and the light of the furnaces rapidly dimmed. A gust of wind blew past, and 10 some paces from Wang Chong, the fire in a furnace went out and froze. The furnace that had been heating up rapidly became icy cold, and then its surface was covered in a layer of white frost. 1 furnace, 2 furnaces, 3 furnaces. The moment Wang Chong stepped out of the room, more and more furnaces were extinguished. In just a few moments, the temperature had dropped by 10 some degrees, and it was continuing to drop at an astonishing rate. As far as Wang Chong could see, a layer of white frost was rapidly enveloping the earth, and as the blizzard howled, his vision was soon reduced to a hazy white. Nay. A few moments later, Wang Chong suddenly heard the neighing of Nei's horses and the cries of soldiers in the distance. Across the Tigris River and the walls of Khorasan, the Arab camp was in chaos. Wang Chong, you're here. At this moment, a familiar voice rang out in his ear as Gao Xinji strode out of the blizzard. The weather has changed, and the temperature is rapidly dropping. This sort of weather is extremely disadvantageous to us. Behind him, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the others walked over. What a heavy blizzard! When we arrived, we saw that the walls were already covered in ice. Lord Protector General, what should we do now? Cheng Qianli asked. The snowstorm came too suddenly, and the temperature dropped very quickly. Furthermore, it was still dropping. Even Cheng Qianli felt that something was wrong, let alone the others. The temperature was dropping too quickly, not just 1 or 2 degrees, but 10 some degrees. If this continued, the ordinary soldiers would soon find it unbearable. Haha, there's no need to worry. I've already made preparations. This sudden drop in temperature is a blessing, not a curse. To their surprise, Wang Chong was not the slightest bit worried. On the contrary, his face lit up with joy. He abruptly turned his head and looked at a certain place in the night sky. There seemed to be a profound meaning in his eyes. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and the others were stunned at first, and then they subconsciously followed Wang Chong's gaze. When they saw where Wang Chong was looking, their bodies trembled in understanding. A blizzard. This was admittedly a problem for the Tang people, Sassanids and rebel soldiers, but it was a true disaster for the hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers camped out in the open. At that moment, everyone understood what was going on. So Wang Chong, is this the opportunity you spoke of? Gao Xianji and Wang Chong stood side by side, gazing at the blizzard and the ever-thickening frost. Wang Chong nodded. The blizzard he had been waiting for had finally arrived, and there was no need to hide anything. The Little Ice Age. This thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind as he gazed up at the blizzard. Other than himself, no one else, not even Gao Xianji or Baram, knew what this blizzard signified. This was no ordinary snowstorm, nor was it any ordinary harsh winter. When a country is on the verge of destruction, a monster must appear. Before any calamity, there would always be signs and phenomena. Not long ago, the black eclipse of the sun over the city of Talas was the beginning of this calamity. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.